The warp tore open above Armageddon, not with the familiar crimson hemorrhage of chaos incursion, but with something else entirely. A jagged slash of crackling silver blue and molten gold that screamed across every frequency the Imperium's auger arrays could detect. Tech priests monitoring the planet's orbital defense grid fell to their knees as Binharik Kent turned to static. Astropaths 3 systems away clutched bleeding eyes and shrieked warnings of gods. Not the 4, but others, locked in eternal combat. Then 2 figures fell through. They were still fighting. Thor Odinson, god of thunder, prince of Asgard, swung Mjolnir in a devastating arc that would have shattered continents. The hammer crackled with lightning that didn't belong in this reality. Too pure, too bright, a blue-white fury that made the polluted skies of Armageddon recoil. His crimson cape billowed like a war banner as he descended, warrior's instinct already cataloging the nightmare industrial hellscape below, even as his attention remained fixed on his enemy. Black Adam met the blow with both fists wreathed in golden lightning. The impact detonated between them with the force of a plasma bomb, and both gods hurtled downward faster, their battle uninterrupted by the trivial matter of dimensional displacement. They struck the surface of Hive Volcanus like twin meteors. The shockwave flattened 6 city blocks. Ork boys who'd been in the middle of a war charge against Imperial positions were vaporized instantly. Gretchen were turned to green mist. A basilisk artillery piece was flipped end over end like a child's toy, crushing 2 squads of Cadian shock troops before exploding in a fireball that added to the apocalyptic tableau. In the crater, 50 meters wide, still glowing with residual divine energy, Thor pushed himself to one knee. His armor, gleaming silver and red, was scored but unbroken. Mjolnir's head smoked as reality itself tried to reject its existence. Around him, the air tasted wrong, metallic, rancid. The sky was a diseased yellow-brown, choked with the output of 1 billion manufactorums. The architecture that hadn't been demolished by their landing was grotesque. Gothic spires crusted with skulls, Baroque excess married to brutal functionality, everything larger than it needed to be and decorated with imagery of death. "By Odin's beard," Thor muttered, rising to his full height. "What manner of realm is this?" Black Adam answered with a lightning bolt. The golden energy slammed into Thor's chest and sent him skidding backward through rubble, boots carving furrows in the pulverized rockcrete. The god of thunder raised Mjolnir, and the hammer's enchantments absorbed the worst of it, but he felt the difference immediately. The attack had been weaker than it should have been, perhaps 70% of Black Adam's normal output, and his own counterswing, when it came, felt sluggish. Mjolnir's lightning sputtered, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Something about this place was wrong. Black Adam descended from the air, boots touching down on a pile of orc corpses with contemptuous ease. The champion of Shazam, or rather, to the champion of the Egyptian gods who'd granted him power 5,000 years ago, surveyed the battlefield with cold, tactical assessment. His black and gold costume was pristine despite the dimensional journey. The lightning bolt emblazoned on his chest seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "I don't know where we are, Asgardian," Black Adam said, his voice carrying the weight of millennia and absolute certainty. "But when I'm done with you, I'll conquer it." Around them, the battlefield had gone eerily silent. Orks, creatures who lived only for violence, whose genetic programming made retreat biologically impossible, were staring at the crater. A knob with a power claw the size of a small vehicle tilted its head, tusks gleaming with confusion. These newcomers had just killed 36 boys with their landing. The sheer spectacle had even impressed creatures whose entire culture revolved around impressive violence. Then the Warboss bellowed, "Waaagh!" and 200 orcs charged both gods simultaneously. Thor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Finally, opponents with sense. He spun Mjolnir, and lightning erupted from the hammer in a sweeping arc. It was weaker than he'd intended. The electricity earthed itself into the metal-heavy ground too quickly, the usual devastating chain lightning reduced to a mere killing strike. But it was enough. 15 orcs dropped, their crude armor flash-welded to their bodies, nervous systems fried beyond even their absurd regenerative capabilities. Black Adam didn't bother with speeches. He simply accelerated. The swiftness of Heru carried him forward at speeds that turned the world into a blur. He caught the first orc's crude chopper mid-swing, crushed the weapon to scrap metal, then drove his fist through the creature's skull with such force that the body continued forward another 3 meters on pure momentum before collapsing. The next 5 died in as many seconds. Necks snapped, spines shattered, bodies simply broken by impacts that treated their enhanced physiology like wet paper. Thor met the main charge, head-on. Mjolnir sang its battle hymn as it crushed through orc bodies. A power claw scraped across his armor and actually drew sparks. These creatures were stronger than they looked, but the god of thunder was a warrior born. He'd fought frost giants, dark elves, the armies of Surtur himself. Green-skinned barbarians, no matter how enthusiastic, were not beyond his measure. He caught one orc by the throat, channeled lightning through his gauntlet, and hurled the smoking corpse into 3 more. Mjolnir's return arc caved in a knob's chest. Thor's boot caught another in the jaw with enough force to send it cartwheeling through the air. But there were hundreds of them, and in the distance, Thor could see more coming. Ramshackle vehicles belching black smoke, their design an offense against every engineering principle he'd ever learned. Crude rockets streaking through the polluted sky, and beyond that, structures that defied sense, cathedrals the size of mountains, fortifications that made Asgard's defenses look modest. Humanity, clearly, but a humanity that had gone mad with scale and religious fervor. Black Adam landed beside him, momentarily, was as a deft dread, a walking armor coffin piloted by a half-dead orc and bristling with guns, stomped toward them both. "Truce," Thor offered. "Until I understand this realm," Black Adam replied. "Then I kill you." "Aye, that's fair." The deft dread opened fire. Autocannons roared, heavy stubbers chattered, and a crude flamer gout of promethium vomited toward both warriors. Thor raised Mjolnir, and the worst of it deflected off an electromagnetic field. Black Adam simply flew through the flames, his divine durability rendering them irrelevant, and struck the war machine like a golden missile. Metal shrieked, the deft dread's armor plating, thick enough to shrug off Lascanon fire, crumpled like foil. Black Adam tore through the cockpit. He ripped the pilot free. The orc, still trying to shoot him with a bolt pistol even as it died, and hurled the entire machine into an oncoming truck. The explosion was magnificent. Thor couldn't help it. He laughed. It was a warrior's laugh, full of genuine appreciation for spectacular violence. Whatever this realm was, it knew how to wage war. Then the sky split open again. This time it wasn't a dimensional rift. This time it was worse. A Valkyrie assault carrier screamed overhead, its hull painted in the crimson and white of the Imperial Guard. Multi-lacers opened up on the orc horde with disciplined precision. Behind it came 2 more, and behind those, the distinctive wedge shape of a Thunderhawk gunship, massive, armored, bearing an icon that made Thor's warrior instincts tighten. A blood-red drop within a winged skull. But the Space Marines had arrived. The Thunderhawk's ramp dropped before it even landed, and 5 figures in crimson power armor deployed with perfect tactical efficiency. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their armor baroque and covered in purity seals. Their weapons, bolters, he realized, recognizing the design from the orc corpses, held with the ease of veteran warriors. The lead Marine's helmet turned toward Thor and Black Adam. Even through the emotionless faceplate, Thor could feel the assessment, the suspicion. The bolter didn't lower. Unidentified xenoforms, The Space Marine's voice emerged from his helmet's Vox grill like a sentence of death. "You will cease hostilities and submit to Imperial authority. Resistance will be met with terminal force." Black Adam's eyes narrowed. "Son, I submit to no one." Golden lightning gathered in his palms. Thor raised Mjolnir, but not in threat. "Wait, these warriors are not our enemy." The Space Marine opened fire. Bolts, mass-reactive explosive rounds, streaked toward both gods at supersonic velocity. Thor's reflexes, honed across millennia, brought Mjolnir around in a defensive arc. The rounds detonated against the hammer's Uruk metal, each explosion a thunderclap. One got through and struck his pauldron, the armor absorbing the blast, but the force still rocking him backward. Black Adam didn't dodge. The bolts struck his chest, his shoulders, his face, and ricocheted. His divine durability, the strength of Amon and stamina of Shu working in concert, rendered him functionally invulnerable to conventional weapons. He sneered, and then he moved. The swiftness of Heru carried Black Adam across 50 meters in the blink of an eye. His fist, wreathed in the power of a 10, struck the lead Space Marine's chest plate with enough force to crack ceramite. The Astartes flew backward, servos screaming, and crashed through the wall of a ruined hab block. The other 4 Blood Angels opened fire immediately, disciplined, devastating, every shot a kill strike that would have ended any mortal combatant. Black Adam waded through the storm of explosive rounds like a man walking through rain. He grabbed one Marine's bolter, crushed it to scrap, then delivered an uppercut that lifted the warrior off his feet, despite weighing nearly half a ton in full armor. "Black Adam, stop!" Thor's voice carried the authority of a prince and the desperation of a warrior who saw disaster unfolding. "So these are defenders, not aggressors." But Black Adam had ruled Kahndaq for 5,000 years. He knew tyranny when he saw it. These armored giants, demanding submission, firing without negotiation, they were tools of an empire, and Teth Adam had overthrown empires before. The remaining Blood Angels drew combat blades, chain swords that roared to life with hungry machine spirits. They moved to flank, tactical perfection even in the face of an opponent who just demonstrated near invulnerability. Thor had a choice to make. Stand with the champion who'd been his enemy for years, or side with warriors who at least appeared to be defending this broken world from the greenskin horde. The God of Thunder did what he always did. He chose honor. Thor planted Mjolnir on the ground and lightning exploded outward in a ring. Not to kill, son, but to separate. The electromagnetic pulse scrambled Vox systems, momentarily disrupted power armor servos, and forced everyone to step back. "Enough!" His voice was thunder itself, rolling across the battlefield with divine authority. "I am Thor Odinson of Asgard. I mean no harm to defenders of this realm, but neither will I stand idle while this warrior is attacked without cause." In the moment of shocked silence that followed, while Orks regrouped and the Blood Angels recalibrated, while Black Adam's eyes calculated odds and Thor's heart prayed to the All-Father for wisdom, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was cold, mechanical, absolutely certain. "Both xenoforms will stand down, or this entire sector will be subject to orbital bombardment. You have 10 seconds to comply." High above, barely visible through the polluted clouds, weapons signatures lit up across 3 Imperial Navy destroyers. Thor looked at Black Adam. Black Adam looked at Thor, and both gods, for perhaps the first time in their existences, had absolutely no idea what they'd gotten themselves into. The standoff lasted exactly 4 seconds before the Orks decided democracy was overrated and charged everyone. Thor's warrior instincts kicked in immediately. Whatever political nightmare he'd stumbled into could wait. Greenskins with crude blades and firearms were a universal language he understood perfectly. Mjolnir sang through the air, catching an orc knob mid-leap and sending it tumbling through 3 of its fellows like a boulder through kindling. Black Adam made his own calculation. Orbital bombardment meant ships. Ships meant technology. Technology meant infrastructure he could seize. But first, survival. He accelerated into the Ork charge, golden lightning trailing behind him like a war banner. His fist connected with an Ork's jaw, and the creature's head simply ceased to exist above the neck. The body continued forward another step before collapsing. Black Adam was already 3 opponents past it, moving with the swiftness of Heru, each strike precisely calculated to kill. The Blood Angels hesitated for exactly 1.3 seconds, their enhanced minds processing the tactical situation, before their training overrode their suspicion. Brother Sergeant Raphael barked orders through the Vox, and the squad adapted. The xenoforms were hostile to the Orks. The Orks were the immediate threat. Theological questions about unidentified entities could wait until after the greenskins were purged. Bolter fire joined divine lightning. Thor found himself fighting alongside the crimson-armored giants, and despite the circumstances, he couldn't help but appreciate their skill. These were warriors in the truest sense. Disciplined, fearless, at each movement economical and lethal. One Marine pivoted smoothly, his chainsword taking an Ork's arm at the shoulder, then reversed the strike to open its throat. Another used his bolter like a club when an Ork got too close, the weapon's reinforced frame caving in the creature's skull before he smoothly transitioned back to firing. "You fight well," Thor called out, spinning Mjolnir to generate a vortex of wind that sent a dozen Orks tumbling backward. "What manner of warriors are you?" Brother Sergeant Raphael's response was clipped, professional. "Blood Angels, Adeptus Astartes, angels of death in service to the God Emperor of mankind." He punctuated the introduction by putting 3 bolt rounds through an Ork nob's chest. "You will explain your presence once this Xeno's filth is cleansed." God Emperor. Thor filed that away. And this realm had divinity then, or at least claimed it. But these warriors, these Adeptus Astartes, they fought with devotion that reminded him of his own oath to protect the 9 realms. Perhaps there was common ground here. Black Adam had no such thoughts. He'd heard Emperor, and his 5,000-year-old instincts had categorized this entire civilization as a target. But Teth Adam hadn't survived millennia by being reckless. He observed, even as he slaughtered. The Orks were numerous but disorganized. The armored warriors, Adeptus Astartes, were outnumbered but fought with supernatural coordination. Their weapons were primitive by some standards he'd seen, yet brutally effective. Explosive projectiles, chainsaw blades, each kill methodical, practiced, and their numbers were growing. More of the flying transports, Thunderhawks, but his tactical mind catalogued, were arriving. Squads of crimson-armored giants deployed with military precision, establishing firing lines, supporting positions. The Ork horde, which had seemed overwhelming moments ago, was being systematically dismantled. Then the real reinforcements arrived. The ground shook, not from impact, but from sheer mass approaching. Through the smoke and burning wreckage, a walking cathedral of armor advanced. It stood 12 feet tall, each footfall a thunderous declaration. Terminator armor, though Thor had no name for it. He only saw a warrior encased in enough protection to shame dwarven forge masters, carrying weapons that could crack fortress walls. The Terminator's storm bolter opened fire, and the difference was immediate. Where standard bolters were deadly, this weapon was apocalyptic. And each shell was larger, heavier, and the rate of fire turned a mob of Orks into a red mist in seconds. Brother Captain Sendini has arrived. Raphael voxed, and there was clear relief in his tone. "The xenoforms are contained, my lord, awaiting your orders." The Terminator's helmet turned toward Thor and Black Adam with the slow deliberateness of a predator assessing prey. "I am Brother Captain Alessandro Sendini of the Blood Angels 3rd Company." His voice emerged from the armor's Vox grill like a pronouncement from on high. "You have displayed combat capability beyond standard xenoform parameters. You will surrender your weapons and submit to inquisitorial examination. This is not negotiable. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. Surrender his hammer, the weapon forged in the heart of a dying star, enchanted by Odin himself. I am no one's prisoner, warrior. I have aided in your battle. Your aid was not requested. Sendini's storm bolter shifted fractionally, not quite aimed, but certainly ready. Your presence is a corruption of the Emperor's domain. Compliance is your only option. Black Adam laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. I have overthrown empires, he said, golden lightning crackling between his fingers. I have killed gods and broken armies. I bow to no emperor, no matter how many warriors he commands. The temperature in the immediate area dropped several degrees as 20 blood angels leveled their bolters at both figures. The Orks, sensing the shift in attention, began to rally for another charge, but they were secondary now. The real threat was the standoff developing between divine power and transhuman discipline. Thor stepped forward and positioning himself between Black Adam and the Space Marines. Not quite threatening, not quite protective. A warrior's diplomacy. I am Thor, son of Odin, prince of Asgard, and protector of Midgard. He kept his voice level, reasonable. I know not how I came to your realm, but I swear by my honor, I mean your people no harm. This one, he gestured to Black Adam without looking away from Sendini, is complicated, but we are not your enemies. Your intentions are irrelevant. Sendini's response was absolute. The Inquisition will determine what you are. Until then, you are potential threats to the Imperium of Man. Resist, and you will be executed. Submit, and you may yet prove useful to the Emperor's design. Black Adam's eyes narrowed. And if we simply leave, then you will be destroyed. Sendini gestured, and from the ruins above, Thor spotted the red targeting dots of sniper teams. Dozens of them. His enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive hum of Leskannons charging. In the sky, the shapes of gunships circled like carrion birds. The Imperium had just demonstrated it could bring overwhelming force to bear with terrifying speed. Thor's mind raced. He'd been in tense negotiations before, with frost giants, with dark elves, even once with Thanos himself in the early days. The key was finding common ground, demonstrating value, buying time to understand the situation. But Black Adam was not a diplomat. I have a counteroffer, the champion said, and his voice carried the absolute confidence of a man who'd never truly been defeated. You leave, now, and I will allow you to live. The golden lightning erupted from his body in a sphere of destructive power. The bolter fire opened up immediately. Disciplined, overwhelming, 20 Astartes firing in perfect synchronization. The explosive round struck Black Adam's divine form and detonated, each impact a thunderclap, the combined barrage enough to level a building. When the smoke cleared, Black Adam stood unmarked. Is that your best? He smiled, and it was terrible. Let me show you mine. He shot forward, and even Thor's divine perceptions barely tracked the movement. Black Adam struck Sendini's Terminator armor with both fists, and the blessed ceramite, proof against anti-tank weapons, cracked. The brother captain staggered backward, servos screaming, and for the first time in the engagement, Thor heard something that might have been alarm in the Vox chatter. Target demonstrates extreme resistance to standard munitions. Unable to track movement speed. Brother captain is compromised. Request immediate. Thor made his choice. He couldn't let Black Adam slaughter these warriors, no matter how misguided their approach. Mjolnir streaked through the air and caught Black Adam across the jaw. The impact sent him tumbling sideways, gouging a trench through the rubble. It wasn't enough to seriously harm him. They'd fought too many times for Thor to misjudge that, but it stopped the assault. Stand down, Teth Adam, Thor commanded, Mjolnir returning to his hand. We are strangers here. We do not know the customs, the threats, I know tyranny when I see it. Black Adam rose, golden energy crackling around him like a storm. These warriors serve an emperor, They demand submission, so they threaten orbital bombardment of their own cities. This is Kahndaq all over again, a regime that rules through fear and overwhelming force. He wasn't wrong. Thor had seen enough of this realm in the past few minutes to recognize the architecture of authoritarian control, the religious iconography, the immediate threat of violence against the unknown. But he'd also seen the Orks, the genuine chaos of this world. Perhaps this Imperium was harsh because it had to be. Brother Captain Sendini had recovered, his Terminator armor's machine spirit routing power around the damaged sections. He raised his storm bolter but didn't fire. Professional curiosity had apparently overcome doctrine, at least temporarily. "You struck me," he said, and there was something like respect in his tone. "The armor of my forefathers, the blessed by Sanguinius himself, and you cracked it with your bare hands." "I could have done worse," Black Adam replied. "I chose not to. Consider it a warning." "And you," Sendini's helmet turned to Thor, "intervened to protect my battle brothers, despite having no allegiance to the Imperium." "Why?" Thor shrugged. "You fight to defend this world from invaders. That is a cause I understand. But I will not allow you to execute those who could be allies rather than enemies." For a long moment, only the distant sounds of warfare filled the air. Orks being systematically purged by the Blood Angels' kill teams, the rumble of burning vehicles, the omnipresent industrial grinding of Hive Volcanus. Then a new voice cut through the Vox channels, cold and female, and carrying absolute authority. "This is Inquisitor Cassandra Valdor of the Ordo Xenos. All Blood Angels units are to establish a secure perimeter. The xenoform entities are not to be engaged unless they demonstrate immediate hostile action. I am approaching your position and will assess the situation personally. Captain Sendini, you will maintain current disposition and await my arrival." Sendini stiffened almost imperceptibly. Even through his armor, Thor sensed the shift. Not fear, exactly, but something close. Wariness. The kind of reaction a warrior showed when a superior with absolute power entered the field. "Acknowledged, Inquisitor," Sendini replied. Then, to his men, "Hold positions, weapons ready but not aimed. If they move, you have authorization to fire." Thor looked at Black Adam. Black Adam looked at Thor. The temporary truce was still holding, but barely. They were enemies by history, allies by necessity, and are now prisoners of a regime neither understood. "Any clever ideas, Asgardian?" Black Adam asked quietly. "Aye," Thor replied. "We listen, we learn, and we don't give them a reason to call down that orbital bombardment." "Cowardice doesn't suit you." "Wisdom isn't weakness." Black Adam snorted, but he didn't attack, and he didn't flee. For now, that was enough. In the distance, a sleek black shuttle descended through the polluted sky, bearing the icon of the Inquisition, a stylized eye surrounded by a skull and wings. Whatever came next would define whether these gods found allies in the 41st millennium, or whether they became its next victims. The Inquisitor's shuttle touched down with the kind of precision that spoke of either exceptional piloting or machine spirit obedience Thor hadn't yet catalogued. The ramp descended before the engines fully powered down, releasing a hiss of pressurized air that carried the scent of incense and something else. Something that made the hair on Thor's neck stand up despite his divine nature. Inquisitor Cassandra Valdor emerged like a pronouncement of judgment. She was human, or had been once. Augmetics covered her left arm from shoulder to fingertips, the metalwork intricate and inscribed with high Gothic prayers that Thor's Allspeak translated automatically. "The Emperor protects, the heretic dies. Purity through fire." Her right eye was bionic, the lens clicking and adjusting as it scanned both gods with analytical precision. And she wore armor that was part ceremonial, part functional. Carapace plate over robes of deep crimson, a rosette bearing the inquisitorial seal hanging at her throat. But what drew Thor's attention was the weapon at her hip. A power sword, yes, but also something else. A cyber eagle perched on her shoulder, its mechanical eyes glowing with unnatural intelligence. And behind her, two figures that made even the Blood Angels look mundane. Crusaders, nearly 7 feet tall in Baroque power armor, carrying storm shields emblazoned with the Aquila and power mauls that hummed with lethal energy. Their helmets bore visors shaped like screaming skulls. They moved with the synchronized precision of warriors who'd fought together for decades. Valdor stopped 10 meters from Thor and Black Adam, close enough to demonstrate confidence, and far enough to react if they proved hostile. Her human eye, a cold gray, utterly without fear, assessed them the way a scholar might examine specimens. "I am Inquisitor Cassandra Valdor of the Ordo Xenos," she said, her voice carrying easily across the rubble-strewn battlefield. "I speak with the authority of the God Emperor of mankind, and my word is law from the edge of the Imperium to its heart. You will answer my questions truthfully and completely. Deception will result in your immediate execution. Do you understand?" Black Adam's eyes narrowed. "I answer to no mortal authority. You are on Armageddon, a world of the Imperium of Man, in the Segmentum Solar, in the year 41,926 by the Imperial calendar." Valdor spoke over him without raising her voice, the simple act of interruption carrying more authority than any shout. "You arrived through an unregistered warp anomaly, demonstrating capabilities that exceed known xenoform classifications, and engaged Imperial forces within 30 seconds of manifestation. Your compliance is not requested. It is required." Thor stepped forward, hand raised in a gesture of peace he hoped translated. "Lady Valdor, I mean no disrespect, but we are not subjects of your Imperium. I am Thor of Asgard, and Asgard is not in the Imperial archives." Valdor's bionic eye whirred, no doubt cross-referencing databases Thor couldn't imagine. "Neither are your energy signatures, your weapons technology, nor your apparent disregard for the laws of physics as currently understood by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Which means you are either Xenos masquerading as human, warp entities attempting deception, and so something so unprecedented that the Ordo Xenos has no frame of reference." She paused, and her human eye fixed on Thor with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of Heimdall's all-seeing gaze. "I'm inclined toward the third option, which means you are either the greatest discovery of the millennium or the greatest threat. Help me determine which." There was something in her tone, not warmth exactly, but pragmatism. A willingness to listen before executing. Thor had worked with enough political minds to recognize an opening when he heard one. "We arrived through no intention of our own," Thor explained, keeping his voice measured. "We were in combat," he gestured to Black Adam, "when something pulled us through reality itself. We meant no intrusion into your domain, and we fought alongside your warriors against the Greenskins. After my warriors fired upon you," Valdor countered. "Standard protocol when unknown entities manifest in an active war zone. Your response," she glanced at Black Adam, "was to assault a brother captain of the Adeptus Astartes, hardly the action of peaceful visitors." Black Adam's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. Thor could practically feel the restraint radiating off him. 5,000 years of pride warring with survival instinct. "I defended myself," Black Adam said eventually, each word carefully measured. "Your warriors demanded submission at gunpoint. I have not survived millennia by kneeling to those who threaten me." "Millennia?" Valdor's bionic eye clicked, zooming in on Black Adam's face. "You claim to be thousands of years old?" "I do not claim. I am, as I was born Teth Adam in Karnak before the pyramids rose. I was chosen by the wizard Shazam to be his champion, granted the power of 6 Egyptian gods. I have overthrown empires, killed demons, and ruled nations. Your threats mean nothing to me." The Crusaders shifted almost imperceptibly, shields raising fractionally. Brother Captain Sendini's Vox grill emitted what might have been a growl, but Valdor simply nodded as if Black Adam had confirmed something she'd suspected. Warp touched then, or something similar. She turned to Thor. "And you? Son of Odin, All-Father of Asgard, God of Thunder, Protector of Midgard, what you might call Earth, and the 9 realms beyond. I have fought frost giants, dark elves, and beings of cosmic power." Thor met her gaze evenly. "I'm no stranger to war, Inquisitor, but I prefer to know who I fight, how and why." Valdor was quiet for a moment, processing. Her fingers drummed once against her thigh, a human gesture that somehow made her more unsettling rather than less. "Earth," she said finally. "Terra, the throne world of the Imperium, seat of the God Emperor. You claim to be its protector." Thor's confusion must have shown on his face because Valdor's expression shifted subtly. Not quite sympathy. Inquisitors probably had that beaten out of them in training, but something adjacent to understanding. "You truly don't know where you are," she murmured. "Or when?" "When?" Black Adam's voice sharpened. "What year did you say?" 41,000. By the Imperial calendar, yes. Approximately 39,000 years since the unification of Terra under the God Emperor's banner. Valdor's human eye studied their reactions. If you are indeed from Terra, you are from an age so distant that even the Mechanicus has only fragments of its history. The weight of that statement settled over Thor like Jotunheim's eternal winter. 39,000 years. Midgard, Earth, Terra had endured for nearly 40 millennia beyond his time and had become this, an empire that spanned the stars, ruled by a god emperor, defended by superhuman warriors in Baroque armor. What had happened to his friends? To the Avengers? To humanity itself? Black Adam's tactical mind was already several steps ahead. This emperor, he rules all of humanity. All that survives, Valdor confirmed. The Imperium of Man encompasses 1,000,000 worlds, defended against Xenos threats, heretical uprisings, and the predations of chaos. We are besieged on all fronts, and fighting wars that have raged for millennia. The Emperor, blessed be his name, guides us from his golden throne on Terra, though he has not walked among us for 10,000 years. A god-king who does not rule directly, Black Adam mused, who enforces his will. The Adeptus Terra, the Ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Astartes, the Inquisition. Valdor's tone carried warning. And before you contemplate whatever conquest you're considering, understand this: the Imperium has endured for 10,000 years precisely because we destroy threats before they metastasize. You are currently classified as an unknown threat. Prove otherwise, or be eliminated. Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. Not in threat. Not yet. But in recognition that they stood at a precipice. One wrong word, one aggressive gesture, and this would end in violence. Neither side might survive. "How do we prove ourselves?" he asked. Valdor smiled. It was not reassuring. "You demonstrate your capabilities, your intentions, and your utility to the Imperium. There is a reason you manifested here, on Armageddon, during one of the largest Ork incursions in a century. The Emperor works in mysterious ways, but he does not send divine intervention without purpose. You believe we were sent by your Emperor?" Thor couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "I believe the warp does not operate on coincidence. You appeared in an active war zone with capabilities that exceed even Astartes standards. You fought alongside Imperial forces, despite having no stake in our survival. Either you are a weapon sent by the Emperor's will, or you are a test of our faith and strength." Valdor's bionic eye whirred, focusing. "Help us drive back the Ork invasion. Demonstrate that your power serves humanity's interests. Do this, and we can discuss your long-term status in the Imperium. And if we refuse, Black Adam asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Then I declare you demonic manifestations, and Brother Captain Sendini's fleet reduces this entire sector to molten glass from orbit. You may survive the bombardment. The 3 million Imperial citizens in this hive will not. Their blood will be on your hands." It was blackmail, pure and simple. Comply or be responsible for genocide. Thor felt rage kindle in his chest. This was the threat of a tyrant, holding innocents hostage, but his strategic mind recognized the trap. If they fought, they became the monsters Valdor claimed they were. If they fled, they abandoned millions to die. If they complied, they became tools of an empire they didn't understand. Black Adam's eyes blazed with golden lightning. "You dare! I dare everything in service to humanity's survival." Valdor's voice was cold iron. "You claim to be champions, protectors, gods. Prove it. Fight for the species you claim to defend. Or admit you are nothing but conquerors wearing the mask of heroes." The silence stretched. Orks bellowed in the distance. Their WAAAGH! Unstoppable, their numbers endless. The Blood Angels maintained their positions, weapons ready, eyes hidden behind crimson helmets, but attention absolute. Thor looked at the devastated Hive city, at the smoking ruins and the distant shapes of fleeing civilians. He thought of Asgard, and of the oath he'd sworn to protect the 9 realms. Was this not an extension of that oath? Humanity, no matter how changed, was still worth defending. But this Imperium, he'd seen tyranny before. This had all the hallmarks. "I will fight," Thor said slowly. "Not because you threaten me, Inquisitor, but because those people deserve protection. But know this, I serve no emperor. I fight because it is right, not because I am commanded." Valdor nodded, accepting the distinction. "And you?" She turned to Black Adam. Teth Adam's mind was a storm of calculation. He'd overthrown the tyrants of Kahndaq, freed his people from oppression. This Imperium was everything he'd fought against, absolute authority enforced through violence, justified by faith. But he'd also ruled for 5,000 years. He understood pragmatism. "I will kill your Orks," Black Adam said. "Not for your emperor, not for your Imperium, but because I choose to. And when this battle is done, Inquisitor, you and I will have a conversation about the nature of authority and who truly has the right to wield it." It was a threat wrapped in compliance, and everyone present knew it. Valdor's smile didn't waver. "I look forward to it," she said. "Brother Captain, integrate these entities into your battle plan. Use them as shock troops. If they survive, we continue this conversation. If they fall, the Emperor will judge their worthiness." Sendini's Vox crackled acknowledgement. He turned to Thor and Black Adam, his Terminator armor's weapon systems powering down from combat ready to merely prepared. "Follow me," he commanded. "There is an Ork Gargant approaching from the east. I consider it your field test." Thor didn't know what a Gargant was, but he recognized the tone. This was a trial by combat. Survive and earn a measure of trust. Fall and be forgotten. "After you, Captain," Thor said. Then quietly to Black Adam, "This is not over." "No," Black Adam agreed, watching Valdor's shuttle lift back into the poisoned sky. "It's only beginning." The Ork Gargant was a walking blasphemy against engineering. Thor saw it cresting the ridge of Hive Volcanus' industrial sector and had to recalibrate his understanding of what constituted impossible. It stood nearly 100 feet tall, a towering effigy of scrap metal, stolen Imperial parts, and what appeared to be sheer, bloody-minded willpower holding it together. Its legs were mismatched pistons and hydraulics that should have collapsed under the weight. Its torso was a patchwork cathedral of rust and bullets. And its arms, Emperor preserved them, were massive guns that looked like they'd been assembled by lunatics with a surplus of ammunition and no understanding of structural integrity. Ork glyphs covered every surface, crude faces welded into the armor plating. and the whole structure belched black smoke from a dozen exhaust ports. It moved with a lurching, impossible gait that defied physics, and Thor realized with growing horror that the thing was working because the Orks believed it would. "By Odin's beard," he muttered, "that should not exist." "And yet it does," Brother Captain Sendini replied. His Terminator armor's Auspex feeds painting the Gargant's specifications across his visor. "The Orks call it a mega Gargant. We've designated this one Warboss Urgok's Revenge. It's been stomping through our defensive lines for 3 days. 12 Lehman Russ battle tanks destroyed. 2 Warhound Titans disabled. 1,700 Imperial Guardsmen dead." Black Adam studied the monstrosity with cold tactical assessment. "You want us to destroy it?" "I want to see if you can destroy it." Sendini's Vox grill carried grim amusement. "Standard engagement protocol would involve orbital bombardment or Titan-class weapons. You claim to be gods. Prove it." Thor's warrior spirit stirred. This was a challenge he understood, a foe too great for mortal warriors, requiring divine intervention. He'd fought the Destroyer, he'd battled frost giant war beasts. This rust bucket abomination was loud, dangerous, and currently turning its massive arm cannons toward a battalion of retreating Imperial Guardsmen. "How many civilians are in its path?" Thor asked. 3,000, perhaps 4. Evacuation is ongoing, but... Sendini's words were drowned out by the Gargant's main gun firing. The shell was the size of a cargo hauler. It streaked across the battlefield trailing flame and struck an already damaged manufactorum, detonating with enough force to collapse the entire structure. The shockwave rolled across the ruins, and Thor saw tiny figures, humans thrown like dolls. His decision crystallized. "Black Adam," Thor said, not looking away from the mechanical monstrosity. "Temporary alliance." "Until the scrap heap falls," Black Adam agreed. "Then we discuss who rules this world." "Fair enough." Thor raised Mjolnir, and lightning split the poisoned sky. Not the flickering, warp-dampened strikes he'd managed before. This was the god of thunder reaching deep, pulling on reserves that had terrified frost giants and shattered mountains. The bolt struck the Gargant's head section, and for a glorious moment, Thor thought it would be enough. The Gargant's right eye socket exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. Its head tilted sideways, smoke pouring from the wound. Then it straightened, or bellowed something that sounded like laughter through its exhaust ports, and fired both arm cannons directly at Thor. The Asgardian prince dove, Mjolnir's enchantments barely pulling him out of the blast radius. The shells struck where he'd been standing and detonated, cratering the ground, throwing up a fountain of debris. Thor rolled, came to his feet, and stared. That didn't work as well as planned. Black Adam was already moving. The swiftness of Heru carried him forward in a golden blur, low to the ground, zigzagging through the Gargant's line of fire. Smaller guns, dozens of them, welded at random angles across the machine's torso, opened up. Autocannons, heavy stubbers, crude rockets that left smoke trails like wounded animals. Black Adam flew through the storm of metal. Bullets ricocheted off his divine form. Rockets detonated against his lightning aura and were consumed. He reached the Gargant's left leg and struck it with both fists, channeling the power of a tin through the impact. The leg buckled. Metal shrieked, rivets popped like gunfire. The Gargant swayed, its gyros screaming, and for a moment, Black Adam thought he'd succeeded. Then a hatch opened in the Gargant's torso, and 50 Orks poured out, roaring with glee, firing crude shooters and swinging choppers. They swarmed Black Adam like green ants, each one individually weak but collectively overwhelming. He grabbed one by the throat, hurled it into 3 more, summoned lightning that fried a dozen. But more kept coming. "The interior is filled with the greenskins," Black Adam snarled, ripping an Ork's arm off and using it to club another. "This isn't a machine, it's a mobile fortress." Thor saw the problem immediately. The Gargant wasn't just armor plating and guns. It was a transport, a weapon platform, and a symbol of Ork power all in one. Destroying the legs wouldn't stop it. They'd have to kill the Warboss inside or tear their whole structure apart. He spun Mjolnir, building momentum, and hurled it with all his divine strength. The hammer streaked through the air like a meteor, struck the Gargant's torso dead center, and punched through. The entry hole glowed white-hot, metal peeling back like flower petals. Mjolnir disappeared into the Gargant's guts, and Thor heard, even at this distance, the distinctive sound of orcs dying messily. Then Mjolnir returned to his hand, trailing greenskin blood and machine oil. "Aim for the interior," Thor called out. "The structure is secondary. Kill the crew." Brother Captain Sendini had apparently reached the same conclusion. His Vox channels crackled with orders. All units, concentrated fire on breach points, flamers to the front. Melta teams, target the leg joints, drive them out or burn them inside. The Blood Angels opened fire with renewed focus. Bolter rounds streaked toward the holes Thor and Black Adam had created, detonating inside the Gargant's cramped interior. Flamers bathed the lower hatches in promethium fire. A Melta team, 2 Marines carrying weapons that turned matter into superheated gas, targeted the right knee joint and fired. The Gargant's leg melted. Just melted, the metal turning to slag, pouring like lava. The whole structure tilted, servos screaming. Dosan crashed to one knee with an impact that registered on seismographs 3 hives over. But it kept firing. Orks were pouring out now, a green tide that just wouldn't stop. They slid down chains, jumped from hatches, some just hurling themselves off the Gargant's shoulders and hoping for the best. The battlefield became a chaotic melee. Blood Angels in close combat with Ork knobs. Imperial guardsmen holding defensive lines with nothing but faith and laser guns, and somewhere in the middle, 2 gods trying to kill a machine that refused to die. Thor landed on the Gargant's shoulder and immediately regretted it. The surface was covered in spikes, jagged metal, and what appeared to be landmines welded on for aesthetic purposes. An Ork mech, identifiable by the excessive mechanical augmentation, popped out of a hatch 10 feet away, saw Thor, and grinned with genuine delight. "WAAAGH, you look like a proper fight," it bellowed, brandishing a power claw the size of a small vehicle. Thor grinned back. "I thought you'd never ask." They met in a clash of lightning and crude machinery. The power claw snapped shut on Mjolnir's haft, and electricity arced through the Ork's augmetics. The mech howled, whether in pain or joy was unclear, and head-butted Thor hard enough to crack the metal beneath them. Thor responded by channeling lightning directly into the Ork's skull. The mech's eyes glowed, smoke poured from its ears, and it collapsed, twitching. "You got muckrack!" Another Ork roared from below. "Now you gotta fight me!" This one was bigger, much bigger. Warboss Uruk himself, Thor realized. A monster of an Ork, easily 12 feet tall, covered in thick armor plating. He's wielding a chainsword that was more engine than blade, and a gun cobbled together from what looked like 3 different weapon systems. Thor leapt from the Gargant's shoulder, Mjolnir leading. Uruk met him midair with the chainsword, and the impact sent shockwaves rippling outward. They crashed to the ground in a crater of their own making, each struggling for advantage. "You ain't like the other humies," Uruk bellowed, genuine admiration in his voice. "You got proper muscles, proper fight." "I'm not human," Thor grunted, forcing Mjolnir against the chainsword's spinning teeth. Sparks showered them both. "I'm Asgardian, and you're about to learn what that means." He channeled lightning directly through Mjolnir into Uruk's weapon. The chainsword's motor exploded, chain teeth flying like shrapnel. Uruk howled in rage. He dropped the ruined weapon and simply punched Thor with a fist the size of a boulder. The God of Thunder flew backward, crashed through a ruined wall, and lay there for a moment appreciating the sheer audacity of an opponent who'd tried to fistfight a god. Meanwhile, Black Adam had reached the Gargant's head. He tore through the armor plating with his bare hands, peeling back metal like parchment, and found what passed for the Gargant's control center. A dozen orcs sat at crude controls, pulling levers, pushing buttons, one of them literally hitting the dashboard with a wrench to make it work better. They saw Black Adam and, to their credit, immediately attacked. It went poorly for them. Black Adam moved through the confined space like death incarnate. The swiftness of Heru meant they couldn't track him, but the strength of Amon meant each strike was lethal. Within 10 seconds, the control room was a charnel house of broken green bodies and sparking machinery. He grabbed the main control column, a ridiculous assembly of wires, gears, and what appeared to be a religious icon to some orc god, and pulled. The entire mechanism tore free, wires sparking, fluids spraying. The Gargant shuddered like a dying beast, and then began to fall. "Thor!" Black Adam's voice carried across the battlefield. "Get clear!" The god of thunder heard the warning, saw the massive shadow, and rolled. Uruk, focused on the glorious melee, didn't react in time. The Gargant's head section, severed from its control systems, toppled forward and crushed the Warboss beneath 100 tons of scrap metal and broken dreams. The rest of the Gargant followed, so collapsing in sections, each crash like thunder. Orcs scrambled to escape, some making it, most not. The battlefield fell eerily silent, except for the groaning of tortured metal settling. Black Adam emerged from the wreckage, lightning still crackling around him, not a scratch on his uniform. Thor pulled himself from the rubble, hammer in hand, armor scorched but intact. They met in the center of the devastation, surrounded by dead orcs and ruined machinery, while blood angels secured the perimeter and Imperial guardsmen stared in open-mouthed shock. "Not bad," Black Adam admitted grudgingly. "You're adequate yourself," Thor replied with a slight smile. Brother Captain Sendini approached, his Terminator armor's servos whining. Through his helmet's Vox grill came something that might have been approval. "The Inquisitor will want to hear of this. You may yet prove useful to the Imperium." Thor and Black Adam exchanged glances. They'd passed the first test, but both knew the real challenge was just beginning. The question was whether they'd face it together or against each other. 3 days after the Gargant fell, Thor began to understand the scale of what the Imperium truly was. Inquisitor Valdor had relocated them to a command fortress carved into the bones of Hive Volcanus itself, a structure so massive it made Asgard's great halls look modest. The walls were 3 meters thick, reinforced with materials Thor had no name for, covered in religious iconography that pressed down on the senses like physical weight. Skulls everywhere. Not decorative, functional. Load-bearing architecture built from the bones of the faithful, according to the guardsmen who'd made the mistake of explaining the building materials to Black Adam, who'd spent the following hour in silence that was more ominous than rage. Valdor had given them separate quarters. Thor suspected this was tactical. Divide and observe. They catalogue their individual behaviors, measure their responses to isolation. He'd let her think it was working. He spent the 3 days learning. The Blood Angels had assigned Brother Heshel as his informal liaison, a young Astartes by the chapter's standards, barely 2 centuries old, whose natural curiosity had apparently overcome his doctrinal suspicion. Heshel talked while they sparred, which was the Astartes' equivalent of making a new friend. Thor learned quickly that the universe of the 41st millennium was a hierarchy of existential threats stacked so high it made Ragnarok look manageable. The Great Rift split the galaxy in 2, Heshel explained, his Chainsword meeting Mjolnir with the practiced ease of a warrior who'd trained his entire life. The warp bleeds through. It's the Chaos Space Marines, our fallen brothers who sold their souls to the ruinous powers, raid across the Cicatrix Maledictum. The Tyranids approach from beyond the galactic rim. The Necrons stir from their tomb worlds. The Tau expand. The Orks. He gestured broadly to encompass the ongoing war outside. The Orks are simply always there. Thor caught Hesiel's chainsword on Mjolnir's haft, reversed the bind, and stepped aside. The Astartes corrected faster than any mortal could have managed. "And your Emperor?" Thor said carefully. "He does not guide you directly." Hesiel's movement slowed almost imperceptibly. The Emperor endures on the Golden Throne, sustaining the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that allows navigation through the warp. To step down would be to extinguish that light. He and the Imperium would be blind and lost. The Astartes paused, gripping his chainsword's hilt. He sacrifices himself every moment so that humanity might endure. Thor heard genuine faith in those words, not the blind obedience he'd initially suspected, but something deeper, a belief born of 10,000 years of survival against impossible odds. He found he couldn't dismiss it. And if there were another way to sustain this beacon, there isn't. Hesiel's answer was immediate, absolute. "Believe me, Lord Thor, the greatest minds in human history have searched. The Mechanicus, the Grey Knights, the Emperor's own sons. There is no other way." Sons. Thor filed that away. Meanwhile, in another sector of the fortress, Black Adam was having a very different education. Valdor had assigned him a rogue trader named Maximilian Drecht as his guide. A calculated choice, Thor suspected, given that rogue traders operated in the gray margins of imperial law. Drecht was a lean, sharp-eyed man with augmetic fingers and the easy confidence of someone who'd survived in the void between stars through wit and ruthlessness. He didn't fear Black Adam. He found him interesting, which was arguably more dangerous. "Tell me about resistance movements," Black Adam had said on the first day, and Drecht hadn't blinked. "Which kind? Political, religious, Xenos-aligned, chaos-touched, or just civilians who've had enough?" The rogue trader had leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who'd negotiated with Ork freebooters and lived. Because they all exist, they all fail eventually, and the Inquisition finds them all, eventually. The ones that don't fail. Ah, Drecht had smiled. Those are called rogue traders, or inquisitors, depending on your perspective. 3 days of conversation had given Black Adam the outline of a truth that hardened his resolve. The Imperium was exactly what he'd thought, a vast authoritarian empire sustained by faith, violence, and the suppression of anything it didn't understand. Billions died in its wars, not because they chose to, but because they had no choice. The infrastructure of control was so total, so ancient, that most citizens couldn't conceive of an alternative. He could conceive of one. He'd built one once in Kandak. On the morning of the 4th day, Valdor summoned them both. The briefing room was deep in the fortress's command levels, a circular chamber with a hololithic projector at its center, displaying a real-time tactical overlay of Armageddon's war zones. 6 Blood Angels commanders stood at attention, along with a tech priest whose augmetics had replaced so much of his original body that Thor couldn't determine where the man ended and the machine began. The cyber eagle on Valdor's shoulder watched both gods with mechanical eyes that missed nothing. The Ork WAAAGH is larger than initial assessments indicated. Valdor began without preamble, her bionic eyes scanning tactical data. Ghazghkull Maguruk Thraka, the Ork Warboss responsible for this invasion, commands forces numbering in the hundreds of billions. We have contained them in 4 primary zones, but containment is failing. 3 more Hive cities face imminent assault. The hololithic display shifted, highlighting population centers. Each one represented millions of lives. Standard doctrine would involve fighting retreat, sacrificing outlying sectors to preserve core infrastructure. Sendini added, "Brutal, necessary. We've done it before." Thor studied the tactical display. "What are you asking of us?" "Your capabilities exceeded our projections in the Gargant engagement," Valdor said. I'm deploying you as independent strike assets, specific objectives requiring capabilities beyond standard Astartes parameters. She highlighted 2 points on the map, separated by hundreds of kilometers of war-torn hell. Target Alpha, a warp beacon the Orks have somehow activated in Hive Tempestora. It's accelerating their WAAAGH, auto-energy, and making nearby greenskins exponentially stronger. It needs to be destroyed before it amplifies beyond containment. She looked at Thor. Target Beta, a captured Imperial command center in the Hemlock Wastes. The Orks have taken 300 Mechanicus adepts prisoner. Standard rescue protocol would take 2 weeks. We don't have 2 weeks. The Mechanicus believes they're being forced to build weapons. Their knowledge in Ork hands would be catastrophic. She looked at Black Adam. Thor immediately recognized the geometry of the assignment. Separated, different objectives. No shared victory, no opportunity to coordinate independent action. Black Adam recognized it too. "You're dividing us," he said flatly. "I'm deploying you according to your individual capabilities," Valdor replied without a flicker of guilt. "The beacon emits electromagnetic interference that would disrupt your divine speed and lightning abilities." She nodded to Black Adam. "Whereas your particular power set makes you better suited to the Hemlock Wastes terrain." It was logical. It was also exactly how an Inquisitor would separate 2 potentially uncontrollable assets and assess them independently. "I'll take the beacon," Thor said before Black Adam could object. "I work well with electromagnetic interference." Black Adam's eyes cut to him. Something passed between them, not trust, but recognition. They both understood the game being played, and for now, they'd play along. "The Hemlock Wastes will suit me," Black Adam said, turning back to Valdor. But I want something in return." "You're not in a position to negotiate?" "I am always in a position to negotiate." Black Adam's voice was absolute calm, which was somehow more threatening than anger. 300 prisoners. When I retrieve them, they answer to me for 48 hours. I have questions about this Imperium's history that I want answered without Imperial curation. Valdor studied him for a long moment. Her cyber eagle clicked its beak. 24 hours, she counted, and a monitoring servitor accompanies you throughout the debriefing. Acceptable. Thor was assigned Brother Hesiel and a 5-man Devastator squad as support for the Tempestora mission. The briefing on the warp beacon was delivered by the tech priest, Magos Brennan, apparently. Now, though most of his name had been replaced by binary designation, who explained with mechanical detachment that the beacon was old Necron technology the Orks had somehow reverse-engineered, or rather, broken and accidentally activated. The structure is self-sustaining once activated, Brennan intoned in a voice half human, half vox. It draws power from the warp directly. The longer it operates, the more entrenched it becomes in local reality. After 72 hours, he paused, servo skulls circling his head twitching. It becomes effectively permanent. How long has it been active? Thor asked. 68 hours. Right. Thor looked at Mjolnir. Then we should leave immediately. The transport to Hive Tempestora was a thunderhawk that shook and rattled through Armageddon's polluted atmosphere as if personally offended by gravity. Hesiel spent the journey in prayer. The Devastator Marines, massive, silent, their missile launchers and plasma cannons taking up considerable cabin space, spent it in the kind of focused pre-battle meditation that Thor recognized from Asgardian warriors before major engagements. Thor spent it watching the landscape below. Even from altitude, Armageddon was a wound on a planet that had once been alive. The equatorial jungle, what little remained, was burning. The Hive cities rose like diseased teeth from a body beyond saving. And everywhere, the evidence of war, tank formations, burning vehicles, the ant-like movements of armies too large to comprehend from above. Humanity had endured this for 10,000 years. He understood now why they built their walls from bones. There was nothing else left to build with. "Lord Thor," Hesiel said, breaking his meditation. The young Astartes, young by their standards, 2 centuries old, was watching him with an expression Thor had seen before, on new warriors who'd just seen their first real battle and were trying to process what they'd learned. "May I ask you something? You've been asking me things for 3 days. Don't stop now. Your hammer. Mjolnir." Hesiel's eyes fell on the weapon with genuine reverence. "I've never seen anything survive both our bolter fire and the demon-touched reinforcement those orcs were using on the Gargant's forward armor. What is it made of?" Thor looked at Mjolnir. Uru metal, forged in the heart of a dying star, enchanted by Odin's hand. He'd never tried to explain it to someone without a frame of reference. "It was forged by dwarves," he said, "in the core of a star, and the metal has no name in your language. And it is enchanted, bound to my worthiness. If I were to lose my way, become unworthy of it, it would not return to my hand." Hesiel was silent for a moment. "The Emperor's warriors carry weapons blessed by the ecclesiarchy," he said carefully. "Priests sanctify them with prayer and ritual, but they are still steel and promethium at their core." He paused. "What you describe sounds more like an artifact of faith than a weapon." Thor considered this. "Perhaps it is both." The Thunderhawk banked hard, descending toward Hive Tempestora's shattered skyline. Through the viewport, Thor saw it immediately, a pillar of sickly purple-black energy rising from the Hive's center, writhing with a light that hurt to look at directly. The warp beacon. Even from this distance, he could feel it. An itch beneath his divine senses, a wrongness that Mjolnir's enchantments reacted to, the hammer vibrating faintly in his grip. And around the beacon's base, swarming like insects drawn to corrupted light, an ocean of orcs. Bigger than the ones he'd fought before. Their eyes were wrong, blank, focused, driven by something beyond their natural bloodlust. The beacon was doing something to them, amplifying them, unifying them in ways that should have been impossible for creatures this chaotic. A whir made flesh, made focused. Emperor's blood. Hesiel breathed beside him. There are 500,000 of them. The Devastators checked their weapons without comment. These were warriors who'd long since made peace with impossible odds. Thor's jaw set, and 4 hours remaining before the beacon became permanent. 500,000 orcs between here and there, his lightning running at 90% thanks to the warp interference radiating from the beacon itself. He thought of Black Adam, alone in the Hemlock Wastes, and wondered if the champion was experiencing anything remotely similar. Then he banked those thoughts and focused. "We land here," he told the Thunderhawk's pilot, pointing to a position 300 meters from the beacon's outer orc cordon. "Fast and loud. I'll draw their attention. Hesiel, your squad follows behind me and keeps the flanks clear." "And then?" Hesiel asked. Thor looked at the 500,000 orcs below when the writhing pillar of corrupted power at their center. "And then I destroy their god." The Thunderhawk hit the ground running. Thor was out before the ramp fully deployed, Mjolnir already spinning, lightning already building in the polluted sky above Hive Tempestor. He didn't wait for the orcs to notice him. He announced himself, the hammer released and streaked skyward, pulling every storm cloud within 5 kilometers into a violent spiral. Lightning erupted downward in a cascade that lit up the Hive's ruins like a second sun. 3 dozen orcs at the beacon's outer perimeter died instantly, their crude armor flash-welded to their bodies, the ground beneath them turned to glass. Every orc within visual range turned toward him simultaneously. 500,000 pairs of red eyes, 500,000 minds, simple and focused and burning with the beacon's amplified war energy, all reaching the same conclusion in the same moment: to kill it. "Good morning," Thor said, and swung Mjolnir into the first wave. The impact was seismic. 6 orcs went down in the initial strike, their bodies hurled backward like broken toys, and Mjolnir's return arc caught two more before Thor had fully extended his swing. He moved forward rather than back, into the press of bodies, denying the horde room to use their guns effectively. Ork tactics, he'd learned, were simple: shoot at range, chop up close, get inside their shooting lanes, and they'd kill each other trying to get to you. He used their numbers against them. Lightning erupted from his body in short, controlled bursts. Not the grand storm calling he preferred, but precise strikes. An orc raised a rocket launcher. Lightning found it before the trigger pulled, and the explosion took 6 greenskins with it. A knob with a power claw lunged. Thor sidestepped and drove Mjolnir into its back with enough force to crater the ground. The weapon felt different here, this close to the beacon, heavier somehow, its enchantments working against the warp corruption that saturated the air. Behind him, Hezjil's Devastator squad deployed with clinical efficiency. The plasma cannons opened up first, superheated bolts of ionized gas cutting through densely packed orc formations. Where they struck, nothing survived. The plasma didn't discriminate between armor and flesh, both simply ceasing to be in a flash of stellar heat. The missile launchers followed, fragmentation rounds detonating at chest height, shrapnel scything through the press of bodies. But the orcs just kept coming. Amplified by the beacon, they hit harder than anything Thor had encountered in this realm. Like an orc boy, not even a knob, just a standard greenskin foot soldier, grabbed Thor's arm with enough force to actually arrest his swing. Thor looked down, genuinely surprised. The creature had blank, focused eyes, none of the crude joy he'd seen in the earlier combat. It was as if the beacon had burned away the orc's personality and left only the weapon. He had butted it and moved on. The beacon was 300 meters away, and it might as well have been 3,000. For every orc he put down, 2 more filled the space. The WAAAGH. Energy was visible now, a faint green luminescence that clung to the greenskin's skin, their weapons, the ground itself. It pulsed in rhythm with the beacon's corrupted light, and Thor felt it pressing against Mjolnir's enchantments like a tide against a seawall. Not winning, not yet, but definitely trying. So Lord Thor. Hezjil's vox crackled through the comm bead the Blood Angels had provided. We're being flanked from the east. Squig riders, at least 100. Thor glanced right. The Squig riders were exactly as insane as the name suggested. Orcs mounted on massive ball-shaped creatures, all teeth and aggression, bounding across the rubble at terrifying speed. Their riders hung on with one hand and swung enormous axes with the other, screaming with something that might have been glee if the beacon hadn't stripped their capacity for it. He had perhaps 4 seconds before they hit Hezjil's squad. Mjolnir left his hand. The hammer streaked horizontally, threading between ruined hab blocks with the enchanted precision of a weapon that knew its master's intent better than he did. So it hit the leading Squig rider square in its mount's flank, and the explosion of kinetic energy was spectacular. The Squig collapsed, launched its rider 30 meters through the air, and the following 5 riders ran into the sudden obstruction in a cascading crash that took half the flanking force off the board immediately. Mjolnir was back in Thor's hand before the dust settled. "Flank is clear," he reported. "Temporarily." "Understood. Plasma cannon is overheating. Switching to bolter fire." They were losing ground. Slowly, systematically, but losing it nonetheless. The numbers were simply too great, and the closer Thor got to the beacon, the more he felt its interference. His lightning was down to perhaps 70% now, each summoning requiring more effort. From the storm connection he'd relied on for millennia, sluggish and unresponsive. He needed a different approach. "Hezjil, that beacon, is it physical? A structure I can strike directly?" Magos Brennan's briefing indicated a central core approximately 2 meters in diameter. "But Lord Thor," the Astartes hesitated in a way that suggested what followed was significant. "The beacon's warp signature means it exists partially outside normal reality. Physical damage may be insufficient." What would be sufficient? A pause. Something that can affect the warp itself. A psychic strike, or a weapon with significant ethereal properties. Thor looked at Mjolnir. Uru metal, enchanted by Odin's hand. Forged in dying starlight. The hammer had cracked the rainbow bridge. Had struck blows that registered across dimensional boundaries. It was, at its heart, a metaphysical weapon wrapped in physical form. Would it be enough? Only one way to find out. He stopped fighting defensively and started fighting offensively. The difference was immediate and devastating. Thor stopped trying to clear a path and simply moved forward, through resistance rather than around it. Orks who blocked him were not redirected. They were removed. Mjolnir swung in great arcing strikes that sent bodies flying in every direction. When the press got too thick to swing, he used the hammer as a bludgeon, driving it forward with both hands like a piston, each impact turning the ground beneath his feet into a crater. Lightning stopped being a precision tool and became a blunt instrument. He called a full storm, ignoring the interference, forcing his divine will against the warp corruption. And it answered, weakened but real. In continuous lightning arced from the sky in a walking barrage that moved with him, electrocuting everything within a 10-meter radius. The Orks howled. Some ran. Most charged harder, the beacon's influence stripping away even the primitive self-preservation instinct that might have given lesser greenskins pause. 50 meters from the beacon, Thor saw the structure properly for the first time. It was wrong in a way that made his eyes hurt. The physical component was a roughly obelisk-shaped stone, ancient, covered in symbols that predated Ork culture by millions of years, the Necron glyphs Brennan had mentioned. But around it, bleeding out of it, overlapping it like a fever dream, was something else. A shape that existed in dimensions Thor couldn't quite perceive directly. He could feel it rather than see it. A presence, so cold and mechanical and utterly alien, that had been sleeping for millions of years and was now half awake. The beacon wasn't just Necron technology, it was a Necron, or the ghost of one. A consciousness transferred to stone, a mind that had endured geological ages of dormancy and was now being fed Ork WAAAGH energy the way a fire is fed oxygen. It was waking up. In 4 hours, less now, maybe 3, it would be fully awake. And then the Orks would be the least of everyone's problems. Hesiel, Thor said, his voice very calm. Brennan didn't mention that the beacon was occupied. Static, then. Could you repeat that, Lord Thor? There's a Necron consciousness inside this structure, ancient, partially awake. The Orks have been feeding it psychic energy, and it's been amplifying their WAAAGH in return. He paused. Did the Ordo Xenos know this? A longer pause. I don't believe that information was in our briefing. No, I don't suppose it was. Thor's jaw tightened. Valdor had sent him in without complete information. Deliberately? Or had she not known? Either possibility was troubling, no time for either. 20 meters now, and the Orks were thicker than ever, drawn to the beacon, protective of it with an instinct that went beyond their usual aggression. The WAAAGH! Energy was almost visible here, hanging in the air like green smoke, and every Ork it touched moved with that same blank, focused ferocity. Thor raised Mjolnir above his head and called everything he had. The sky of Armageddon, poisoned, dark, industrial, cracked open, not metaphorically. The cloud cover physically split apart, driven by a magnetic and electrical charge that overwhelmed even the planet's perpetual smog. For the first time in what might have been centuries, actual sunlight touched the ruins of Hive Tempestora's outer sector. The lightning that followed was not the lightning of a storm. It was the lightning of a god. It struck the beacon in a continuous column, white-blue and absolutely blinding, so bright that the Devastator Marines, 300 meters away, had to shield their helmet visors. The Necron stone screamed, not with sound, but with something that registered in the back of the mind, in the place where instinct lived. The symbols on its surface blazed, fought back, channeled the energy away, redirected it. The orcs nearest the beacon simply died. The WAAAGH energy couldn't protect them from pure divine lightning at this range. But the beacon held. Thor hit the ground running, closed the last 20 meters in seconds, and drove Mjolnir directly into the stone with every ounce of divine strength he possessed. The hammer's enchantments blazed, Odin's magic meeting Necron technology. Meeting warp corruption, meeting the dying consciousness inside, and the impact was... everything went white. When Thor's vision returned, he was on his back, 30 meters from where he'd struck. The ground around the beacon was scorched glass. The orcs nearest it were dead, every single one, their bodies drained of the WAAAGH energy that had sustained them. The beacon was cracked, not destroyed, cracked. A fracture ran from top to base, bleeding a sickly light from its interior. The Necron consciousness that had been waking was receding, the WAAAGH energy feeding it disrupted, not enough to sustain the awakening. It was going back to sleep. Going, not gone. Thor pulled himself upright, joints complaining in a way that hadn't happened since he'd fought the destroyer barehanded. Mjolnir felt heavier than usual, its enchantments temporarily depleted from the impact with Necron technology and warp corruption simultaneously. Around him, the orcs were faltering. Without the beacon's full amplification, their unnatural focus was fracturing, the blank ferocity giving way to confusion. Some were fighting each other, some were simply standing still, looking around as if waking from a dream. Hezul's squad pushed forward into the disoriented horde, bolters methodically ending the remaining threats. It was almost efficient compared to what had come before. Lord Thor. Hezul reached him. His crimson armor scored from shrapnel but intact. The young Astartes looked at the cracked beacon, then at Thor, then back at the beacon. The structure is damaged but not destroyed. I know. Thor rose to his full height. It will sleep. For now. For how long? That was the question, wasn't it? The Necron consciousness would rest until the next time someone fed it enough energy to start waking. In a galaxy constantly at war, constantly generating psychic resonance and death and violence, how long before something else started the process again? Long enough, Thor said, because it was the only honest answer available. His vox bead crackled. A different voice this time. Not Hezul, not Valdor. The tone was wrong. Too calm, too deliberate. This is rogue trader Drecht, and I'm transmitting on Brother Hezul's frequency because the Inquisitor's channels are compromised. A pause. Your companion has done something significant in the Hemlock Wastes. I thought you should know before you return to the fortress. Thor straightened. What has Black Adam done? He retrieved the Mechanicus prisoners as instructed. Another pause, longer this time. He also freed approximately 40,000 civilian laborers from an Imperial penal work camp adjacent to the Ork-held facility. Camp had been there for 60 years. He destroyed the camp's command structure before any Imperial response could be organized. Thor closed his eyes briefly. Is anyone dead? The prison camp's commissars, all 12 of them, and the Ork garrison. Nas, of course. Drecht's voice carried something that might have been admiration carefully disguised as neutrality. He's currently in the center of 40,000 freed prisoners who seem to view him as something between a general and a god. The Inquisitor is displeased. That was, Thor suspected, a profound understatement. One more thing, Drecht added. The freed prisoners include 3 former Imperial Guard commanders who were imprisoned for refusing an order to execute civilians. Black Adam has apparently been talking to them. At length. A final pause. I thought you should know what you're walking back into. The Vox went silent. Thor looked at the cracked beacon, at the faltering Ork horde. at the thin strip of sunlight still visible through the broken cloud cover before Armageddon's perpetual smog closed it back over. Black Adam had gone to rescue prisoners and had instead started something that looked uncomfortably like a revolution. The Inquisitor would call it heresy. The Imperium would call it treason. Thor wasn't sure what to call it yet. He only knew that when he returned to the fortress, everything would have changed. He called Mjolnir to his hand and turned toward the extraction point. Whatever Black Adam had built in the Hemlock Wastes, it was going to define everything that came next. The fortress briefing room had never felt smaller. Inquisitor Valdor stood at the head of the hololithic table, perfectly still, her bionic eye cycling through its full range of augmetic functions as if additional data processing might help her contain the fury she was clearly managing with considerable effort. The cyber eagle on her shoulder was preening, which Thor had learned was its equivalent of nervous energy. Brother Captain Sendini stood to her left, arms crossed, Terminator armor's servos silent. Magos Brennan occupied a corner, mechadendrites retracted, servo skulls grounded. Nobody was sitting down. Black Adam stood in the center of the room like a man who had absolutely no intention of apologizing for anything. Thor positioned himself slightly to Black Adam's right. Not beside him exactly, not apart from him either, and a middle distance that communicated neither alliance nor abandonment. He'd learned that geometry mattered in rooms like this. 40,000 prisoners, Valdor said. Her voice was very quiet. In Thor's experience, very quiet was worse than shouting. 40,000 penal laborers, released from an authorized Imperial correctional facility by your unilateral action, without sanction, without authorization, and without any apparent consideration for the strategic and administrative consequences. The camp had been operating for 60 years, Black Adam replied. The oldest prisoner was taken at 14. He is now 74. His crime was failure to meet manufactorum quota. A pause, measured and deliberate. Not a crime, not a condition of poverty. The penal system exists to maintain order. The penal system exists to maintain control. Black Adam's voice didn't rise, which somehow made it more cutting. I have seen empires, Inquisitor. I have ruled one. The difference between order and oppression is whether the system serves the people or the people serve the system. Your camp served the system. Valdor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You executed 12 commissars. They drew weapons. They drew weapons because you were in the process of destroying Imperial property and releasing Imperial prisoners. Then their deaths are a consequence of their choice, not mine. Thor watched Sendini's gauntlet tighten on his storm bolter. Not raising it, not yet, but the instinct was clearly there. And these were the kinds of conversations that ended in execution orders, and everyone in the room knew it. The 3 former Imperial Guard commanders you've been speaking with, Valdor continued, shifting tack with the precision of someone who knew when a direct assault wasn't working. Commanders Vasari, Okonkwo, and Reyes. They were imprisoned for insubordination, specifically for refusing to execute the civilian population of Hive Secundus Gamma during a chaos incursion. I know, Black Adam said. I read their files. All 3 led successful defenses of their sectors despite the order. The civilians they protected contributed 6,000 new recruits to the Imperial Guard within 2 years. He met Valdor's gaze. You imprisoned heroes because they defied authority, even when defying authority was correct. The Imperium cannot function if commanders choose which orders to follow. The Imperium cannot deserve to function if it punishes men for choosing not to murder children. Black Adam's voice was absolute, final. I am not debating this with you, Inquisitor. I retrieved your prisoners. I completed my assigned objective. What I did additionally was a moral imperative, not a military action. I will not justify it. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either dialogue or violence. Thor decided to intervene before it became the latter. Inquisitor Valdor. He kept his voice measured, reasonable. Black Adam completed his mission. The Mechanicus adepts are recovered, their knowledge secured. The Ork garrison is destroyed. And whatever additional actions he took, he felt Black Adam's eyes cut to him sharply at the word whatever, but pressed on, occurred in a combat zone, under his judgment as the senior capable force in the field. He is not a sanctioned Imperial agent, Valdor replied. His judgment has no standing in Imperial law. Neither does mine. Yet you deployed us both. Thor let that hang for a moment. You cannot grant us operational authority and then prosecute us for exercising it. Valdor studied him with her bionic eye for a long moment. Click, whir, adjust. Measuring. The 40,000 released prisoners are currently in Sector 7's Underhive, she said finally. Without food distribution networks, without shelter allocation, without administratum support, they will begin dying within a week. Now the 3 commanders are apparently organizing them, which means an unauthorized military force is forming in an active war zone. She paused. Whatever your intentions, this situation creates problems that didn't exist yesterday. Then give them food distribution and shelter allocation, Thor said. Integrate them. You have a war to fight, and they represent 40,000 potential laborers, soldiers, and support personnel. Imperial law requires penal review before. You're under orbital bombardment from 500 million Orks. Thor gestured at the hololithic display still showing Armageddon's war zones. Is this genuinely the moment for bureaucratic procedure? Another silence. Different quality this time. Valdor's human eye moved between Thor and Black Adam, calculating odds and outcomes with the speed of a mind trained for exactly this kind of pressure. The Mechanicus adepts, she said eventually, turning to Magos Brennan. Their assessment? Brennan's mechadendrites extended and retracted twice, the tech priest equivalent of clearing a throat. The adepts were subjected to coercive technical interrogation by the Ork garrison's resident mechs. Several suffered neural damage. However, a pause loaded with mechanical reluctance. The entity designated Black Adam intervened before critical technical knowledge was extracted. 3 adepts confirm he arrived at precise moment of maximum information security risk. More mechadendrite movement. From a purely objective standpoint, the mission parameters were fulfilled with optimal timing. Valdor absorbed this. Her cyber eagle stopped preening and fixed both eyes on Black Adam with an attention that seemed almost evaluative. Lord Thor, she said, the beacon at Hive Tempestora. Your report indicated structural damage but not destruction. The shift in subject was deliberate, giving herself room to think about Black Adam while pivoting to Thor. He recognized the technique. Correct. The beacon is a Necron construct containing a partially conscious entity. Thor held her gaze steadily. Information that was not in the briefing you provided, deliberately or otherwise. Sandini's helmet turned fractionally toward Valdor. Interesting. The Necron nature of the structure was classified beyond your clearance level, Valdor said, and to her credit, she didn't look away. I made a judgment that full disclosure would alter your approach in ways that might compromise the mission. And if I'd gone in knowing, what would I have done differently? You might have attempted communication rather than destruction. Valdor's voice was flat, professional. We cannot risk communication with Necron entities on an active war zone. The last Inquisitor who attempted it in the Segmentum Obscurus lost 11 worlds to the resulting Tomb Awakening. Thor considered this. The logic was internally consistent. He still didn't like being used as an instrument by someone who controlled his information, but he could understand the reasoning, even if he rejected the method. The beacon is cracked, he said. The Necron consciousness is dormant again, but it won't remain so. Now the structure needs to be either fully destroyed or contained before the Orks, or anyone else, can use it to feed it again. Magos Brennan is already developing a containment protocol, Valdor confirmed. Demolition team will be dispatched within the hour. She paused. Good work, Lord Thor. The words were genuine. That was perhaps the most unsettling thing she'd done since they'd met. Offer genuine acknowledgement. It was harder to be angry at someone who recognized your contribution. "What happens now?" Thor asked directly. Valdor moved to the hololithic display, her augmetic fingers manipulating the controls to pull up a broader strategic view of Armageddon. 3 hive cities pulsed red under active assault. 6 more were amber, threatened. The Ork lines formed a continent-spanning crescent that was slowly, inexorably, compressing toward the planet's primary population centers. "Ghazghkull Thraka himself is moving," she said. "Our astropaths detected the psychic signature of his personal WAAAGH in Sector 12 3 hours ago. He's leading the assault on Hive Volcanus personally." She highlighted the city, the largest amber zone. "If Volcanus falls, the southern defensive line collapses. Estimated civilian casualties across 4 sectors, 60 to 80 million. The number sat in the room like a physical weight. "And you want us there?" Black Adam said. "Not a question. I want you there," Valdor confirmed. "Together this time." She looked between them steadily. "I won't pretend the last deployment wasn't partially designed to assess you separately. It was. The results were," she paused fractionally, "instructive." "Instructive," Black Adam repeated. "You are both capable of independent action that produces results beyond standard military parameters. You're also both capable of independent action that creates situations requiring significant Imperial resource allocation to manage." She didn't look away from him. "I'm asking you to work together. Channeled. At Volcanus." "You're asking us to fight Ghazghkull," Thor said. "Yes." Thor looked at Black Adam. The champion was watching Valdor with the expression he'd worn since they'd entered the room, controlled, calculating, giving nothing away. But Thor had fought beside him and against him enough now to read the slight tension in his jaw, the fractional narrowing of his eyes. Black Adam wasn't thinking about the mission. He was thinking about what came after. "One condition," Black Adam said. Valdor's expression didn't change. "Sir, state it." "The 40,000 freed prisoners. Commander Vasari gets official Imperial amnesty for herself and her command. They are integrated as a recognized auxiliary force under her leadership, not dispersed into the general labor pool." He held Valdor's gaze with 5,000 years of absolute will behind it. Non-negotiable. The Inquisitor was quiet for 3 seconds. 4, 5. "If Volcanus holds," she said finally, "I will recommend amnesty to the appropriate administratum body. Recommendation is not guarantee. I don't control the administratum. But your recommendation carries weight. Considerable weight, yes. Then we have an agreement." Black Adam turned to Thor with an expression that wasn't quite partnership, but was something adjacent. "Unless the Asgardian has objections." Thor thought about Heschel, and about the 3 days of conversation and sparring, about what the young Astartes had said regarding the Emperor's sacrifice. He thought about 60 million potential casualties and a Warboss whose psychic signature was apparently powerful enough for astropaths to detect across a planet. He thought about the 40,000 people currently in Sector 7's Underhive, alive because Black Adam had made a unilateral decision that by any reasonable moral standard had been correct. "No objections," Thor said. "But Valdor," he turned to the Inquisitor, "no withheld information this time. Whatever we're walking into at Volcanus, we walk in knowing everything you know." Valdor considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed." She manipulated the hololithic controls again, and the display shifted to Hive Volcanus. The scale of the approaching Ork force was staggering, not hundreds of millions, but billions, a green tide that covered the strategic display from edge to edge. And at its center, a single dot marked GHAZGHKULL, confirmed location, pulsing like a malignant star. Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka is the greatest Ork warboss in recorded Imperial history, Valdor said, her voice taking on the cadence of a military briefing. He has led 2 successful invasions of Armageddon. He has been killed, apparently, twice. Both times, his odd boys retrieved his brain and placed it in a new body. She paused. He is not a combatant. He is a force of nature wearing the shape of a combatant. How large is he? Thor asked. Last confirmed sighting placed him at approximately 4 meters. Current WAAAGH energy levels suggest possible growth beyond that estimate. Black Adam's eyes didn't change. I've killed things larger. I don't doubt it, Valdor said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that might have been the seed of genuine respect. But size isn't what makes Ghazghkull dangerous. She brought up the psychological profile, a document that was mostly classified notations and redacted sections. What makes him dangerous is that he believes absolutely in Gork and Mork, the Ork gods, and that belief in the warp is a form of reality. Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. He has divine backing. Of a kind, yes. The Ork warp presence, what scholars call the WAAAGH gestalt, is a genuine psychic phenomenon. When a warboss of Ghazghkull's power fights, he isn't just fighting. He's channeling the collective belief of trillions of Orks across the galaxy. Valdor looked at both of them steadily. You will not be fighting one opponent. You will be fighting a religion. Black Adam smiled slowly. It was the smile of a man who had spent 5,000 years making exactly this kind of calculation. Good, he said. I know how to fight religions. Hive Volcanus burned from the inside out. The Thunderhawk carrying Thor and Black Adam broke through the cloud cover at 15,000 feet, and the scale of the assault below made even the Gargant engagement look like a skirmish. The Ork lines didn't have a front. They had a perimeter, a continent-spanning ring of green bodies and grinding machinery that compressed inward from every direction simultaneously. The Hive City rose from the center of it like a dying lighthouse, its upper spires still intact, its lower sectors already swallowed by the green tide. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield in clusters, artillery exchanges, void shield generators failing in cascading bursts, the distinctive blue-white flare of plasma weaponry meeting the orange-red of Ork combi scourges. From altitude, it looked almost beautiful, the way catastrophic things sometimes did when you were far enough away to lose the scale of individual deaths. Thor didn't let himself stay that far away. There, Black Adam said, pointing toward the Hive's eastern approach. Thor saw it immediately. The WAAAGH. Energy was visible from the air, not the faint luminescence he'd seen near the beacon, but a genuine phenomenon, a green-gold aurora that rose from the ground in columns wherever the Ork density was highest. And at the center of the densest concentration, moving with a purpose that distinguished it from the surrounding chaos, something vast. Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka was 4.5 meters tall. The intelligence reports had undersold him. He wasn't wearing armor. He was armor. His body so extensively modified by Ork pain boys and mechs that the boundary between flesh and machine had become philosophical rather than physical. Massive hydraulic legs carried a torso built like a fortress wall. One arm ended in a power claw that could tear battle tanks apart with casual contempt. The other arm was a gun so large it had its own exhaust ports. And above the mechanical nightmare, a skull face with eyes that blazed with the WAAAGH energy. Not blank, like the beacon-amplified Orks, but furiously, intelligently alive. Ghazghkull wasn't being controlled by the WAAAGH. He was generating it. Around him, his personal retinue, meganobs in armor that made standard Ork weaponry look ornamental, formed a living fortress. Each one was a monster in its own right, power claws and combi weapons. To their crude intelligence focused entirely on protecting their warboss and killing everything else. Behind them, stretching back as far as Thor could see, an ocean of orcs moved in the closest approximation to coordinated tactics the species could manage. Imperial forces were trying to hold. Thor could see the defensive lines, trenches carved into the Hive's outer rockcrete, lemon rust battle tanks forming interlocking fire zones, artillery batteries pounding the Ork advance with continuous fire. The guns were excellent, the soldiers were brave, the mathematics were wrong. There were simply too many Orks, and Ghazghkull's presence was making each one fight with a ferocity that multiplied their effectiveness several times over. "We go directly for Ghazghkull," Black Adam said. "Not the Horde, the head." "Agreed," Thor replied. "Cut the where at its source, and the Horde loses cohesion. I'll be faster getting to him. You follow and keep the meganobs off me while I engage." Thor raised an eyebrow. "You want to fight him alone?" "I want to fight him first." Black Adam's eyes were fixed on the massive Warboss below with an expression that Thor recognized from looking in mirrors before great battles. "You'll have your turn." The Thunderhawk's ramp dropped at 3,000 feet. They didn't wait for the landing. Black Adam hit the air like a golden missile, the swiftness of Heru accelerating him instantly to speeds that left a visible shockwave in the polluted atmosphere. He was past the outer Ork lines before the greenskins could process what they were seeing, through the Meganob's retinue before their targeting systems could track him, and in Ghazghkull's face before the Warboss had finished the word he was bellowing to his troops. The impact was seismic. Black Adam's fist struck Ghazghkull's chest plate with the full force of the strength of Amon amplified by the swiftness of Heru. The kinetic energy was staggering, enough to crack battle tank armor, to shatter reinforced bulkheads, to punch through reality itself in certain circumstances. The blow connected, and Ghazghkull's massive frame rocked backward 3 steps. 3 steps, not meters, not through walls. 3 steps. The Warboss looked down at his chest plate, a dent, perhaps 2 inches deep in metal that had shrugged off Lascanon fire. His eyes blazed brighter. "Oh, aye," Ghazghkull said, and his voice was a physical force, a rumble that registered in the chest cavity. "I did actually hurt a bit." He swung the power claw. Black Adam got his arms up, but the force still sent him skidding backward 30 meters, feet carving furrows in the battlefield. He caught himself on a burned-out Lehman Russ, the tank's hull crumpling under his grip like foil, and pushed off before Ghazghkull's follow-up stomp could connect. The Warboss was fast, obscenely, impossibly fast for something that weighed what he weighed. The hydraulic legs moved with machine precision, each step a controlled explosion of power, and when the power claw snapped shut on empty air where Black Adam had been half a second before, the shockwave of displaced atmosphere was enough to throw nearby Orks off their feet. Black Adam redirected. Upward this time, the swiftness of Heru carrying him in a tight spiral around Ghazghkull's body, also the power of a 10 crackling in his palms. He struck 6 times in 2 seconds, targeting joints in the mechanical armor, seams between augmented flesh and machine components. Each blow was precisely calculated, the wisdom of Zehuti guiding his hands to weak points that a lesser warrior wouldn't have identified. 5 of the 6 strikes landed as intended. The 6th caught Ghazghkull's enormous hand as the Warboss tracked the movement faster than he should have been able to, and the grab that followed was one of the few things in 5,000 years of existence that had genuinely surprised Teth Adam. Ghazghkull caught him by the leg and threw him straight up. Black Adam became a golden comet briefly visible above the smoke layer before gravity reasserted itself and began pulling him back down. Thor was already moving. But he'd tracked the engagement from above, Mjolnir spinning, building the charge he needed. When Black Adam went skyward, Thor dove, not toward Ghazghkull directly, but toward the Meganob's retinue that was now surging forward to capitalize on their Warboss's success. The thunderstrike hit the retinue like a divine hammer, which it was, technically. Thor came down in the center of the Meganob's formation with Mjolnir leading, and the ground cratered beneath the impact. The two Meganobs closest to the strike point were thrown clear, their massive armored forms tumbling like discarded toys. The ones farther out staggered, servos screaming, weapons swinging toward this new threat. Thor was already moving. Mjolnir found gaps in Meganob's armor with the precision of a weapon that had killed gods and giants, narrow seams between plates, the joint connections, the relatively vulnerable neck sections that their bulk made them unable to protect effectively. He wasn't trying to destroy the armor. He was trying to disable the orcs wearing it, and there was a meaningful difference in approach. A power claw the size of a Thunderhawk engine swung toward him. Thor ducked under it, drove Mjolnir upward into the arm's hydraulic assembly, and the mechanism seized with a shriek of tortured metal. Another Meganob grabbed for him. He rolled beneath the grasp, came up behind it, and discharged a focused lightning strike directly into the joint, where its head connected to its enormous shoulders. The Meganob dropped. The others were adapting. Orcs were many things, but tactically inflexible wasn't one of them, not at this level. The Meganobs began working in pairs, cutting off angles, forcing Thor to commit to directions before changing them. The war energy made them faster, stronger, more coordinated than their species had any right to be. He took a hit. A massive backswing he couldn't fully avoid connected with his shoulder, and the impact was significant. His divine physiology absorbed most of it, but the force still drove him sideways, and he felt something creak in his armor that hadn't creaked before. These things hit like frost giants. Black Adam returned from the sky. He came down on Ghazghkull with both fists leading, the descent adding velocity to divine strength, and this time the impact drove the Warboss to one knee. The ground beneath Ghazghkull's feet cracked in a spiderweb pattern extending 10 meters. Orks in the immediate vicinity were thrown flat. Ghazghkull's knee touched the ground and stayed there for exactly 1 second. Then he rose, and his eyes burned with something that went beyond WAAAGH energy. This was personal now. This small golden figure had put the great Ghazghkull Maguruk Thraka on one knee in front of his entire WAAAGH. The insult was cosmological in scale. "Ya fight good," Ghazghkull declared, and reached for Black Adam with both arms simultaneously. The power claw and the massive gun arm, not firing but grabbing, trying to simply seize and crush. Black Adam went between them, through the gap at the center, and drove his hands directly into Ghazghkull's chest plate. Lightning erupted, the power of a 10 channeled through palms pressed directly against metal, not an explosive strike, but a sustained discharge, a current flowing continuously into the Warboss's mechanical components. Ghazghkull's augmetics began to fail, hydraulic systems sparked. One eye's blazing light flickered. The gun arm's mechanisms jammed with a grinding protest. The Warboss roared and head-butted Black Adam so hard the crack was audible across the entire battlefield. Black Adam stumbled. The headbutt had connected with enough force to shatter tank armor, and while his divine durability kept him alive and functional, the impact had been significant. His sustained lightning discharge interrupted. Ghazghkull's failing systems began rerouting, compensating. Thor reached Ghazghkull's flank while the Warboss was focused on Black Adam. He swung Mjolnir in the widest arc his reach allowed, targeting the junction between Ghazghkull's mechanical torso and the hydraulic leg assembly, the point Black Adam's assault had already stressed. The hammer struck true, connecting with a crack that resounded even over the thunder of artillery and the roar of 500 million orcs. Ghazghkull's left leg buckled, not collapsed, buckled. The hydraulics compensated, the whoa energy flowing through them, doing things that hydraulics mechanically shouldn't be able to do. But the joint was compromised now, movement restricted, the elegant mechanical symphony of the leg assembly reduced to a labored limp. Two gods working together had genuinely wounded Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. The Warboss looked between them with those blazing eyes, and in their depths, Thor saw something he hadn't expected to see in an Ork. Something calculating. A Ghazghkull Maguruk Thraka wasn't just a weapon, he was a mind. 2 UVYEZ, the Warboss rumbled, studying them both. Not humies, something else. He flexed the power claw, the damaged mechanism sparking but functional. Gork and Mork sent yes, a proper test. We were not sent by your gods, Black Adam said, circling. All the best fights is from the gods. Ghazghkull tracked him with the gun arm, mechanisms grinding. You fight like you got something to prove. Both UVs. The blazing eyes moved to Thor. What you trying to prove? Goldy hair. Thor kept Mjolnir ready, watching the Meganobs regrouping in his peripheral vision. I'm trying to stop you from killing 60 million people. That's it. Genuine puzzlement in the massive voice. Not for glory, not for your god, just stop the killing? That's enough reason. Ghazghkull was quiet for a moment that stretched strangely. The WAAAGH, energy still pouring off him in waves, but somehow less aggressive than before. More contemplative. I like yes, he said finally. Both UV yes. You hit hard and you got reasons. The power claw opened and closed, but I'm still gonna kill yes. Gork and Mork want to see how long you last. The Meganobs were in position, flanking both gourds, cutting off retreat, forming a steel ring that compressed inward with methodical Ork logic. Black Adam moved to stand beside Thor, not dramatically, not with any gesture toward alliance, simply repositioning to the tactically optimal location, which happened to be the same ground Thor occupied. I have a plan, Black Adam said quietly. Does it involve us surviving? Possibly. Better than nothing, Thor replied. Tell me. Black Adam looked at the WAAAGH, energy still flooding the battlefield, at the billions of Orks being driven by Ghazghkull's divine momentum, at the compromised leg joint they'd created together. The warp powers his body and amplifies his presence, Black Adam said. The Egyptian gods gave me the power of a 10 specifically to disrupt such energies. But I need time to build the charge. Sustained contact with his central nervous system, not strikes. At least 30 seconds. 30 seconds of sustained contact with Ghazghkull. Thor absorbed this. While I keep the Meganobs off you and prevent the Warboss from removing you from his person. Yes, that's not a plan. That's a prayer. Black Adam almost smiled. I've answered prayers before. The Meganobs charged. Thor met them like a force of nature. Mjolnir became a blur, moving faster than the eye could follow, targeting mechanisms and joints with the efficiency of a warrior who'd spent the last 20 minutes learning exactly how these creatures were assembled. Lightning arced continuously, no longer the focused precision strikes of the early battle, but a sustained field that made every Meganob who entered the radius feel it in their augmetics. He took hits. Several. Each one significant enough to remind him that he was in a universe that had had 10,000 years to develop ways of killing things that shouldn't be killable. His armor took the worst of it, but the force transferred through, and when he felt the growing toll of cumulative impact in places his divine physiology couldn't entirely compensate for. He didn't stop. Black Adam hit Ghazghkull from behind, got his arms around the Warboss's massive frame, and pressed his palms flat against the junctions of flesh and machine. The power of a teen began to flow, not explosive, not destructive, but penetrating. Searching. Following the WAAAGH, energy back to its source within Ghazghkull's impossibly modified body. Ghazghkull roared and tried to shake him off. Black Adam held on with 5,000 years of stubborn will and divine endurance. The Warboss slammed him against a ruined building. Black Adam held on. Ghazghkull reached back with the power claw. The damaged joint prevented the angle he needed. He tried to shoot backward with the gun arm. The jammed mechanism failed again. 15 seconds. 20. The whir. Energy was changing. Thor could see it, the green-gold aurora flickering, interrupting, surging and ebbing in a pattern that hadn't been there before. Orks at the perimeter were faltering, their amplified coordination stuttering. 25 seconds. Ghazghkull dropped to both knees. The WAAAGH aurora contracted sharply, collapsing inward, and across the battlefield, from horizon to horizon, the Ork advance slowed, not stopped. These were Orks. Nothing stopped them entirely, but the unified purpose, the divine momentum, the religious certainty that had been driving billions of greenskins faltered like a light in wind. 30 seconds. Black Adam released and dropped clear. Ghazghkull knelt in a crater of his own making, hydraulic legs failing. The WAAAGH, the energy that had made him a god, temporarily disrupted at its source. His eyes still blazed, but with fury rather than divine momentum now. Personal. Wounded. The Warboss looked up at both gods with an expression that was somehow simultaneously enraged and deeply satisfied. "Good fight," he rumbled. "Good fight." Then 12 Blood Angels Thunderhawks screamed overhead, every weapon firing, and Ghazghkull's Meganob's retinue ceased to exist in a sustained barrage of plasma, missiles, and las cannon fire. Thor raised Mjolnir and discharged everything he had left in a single focused strike at Ghazghkull's compromised leg joint. The hydraulics exploded. The leg gave out entirely. 4.5 meters of the greatest Ork warboss in history crashed sideways into the ruins of Volcanus' outer wall. He wasn't dead. They both knew that. Orks like Ghazghkull didn't die. They retreated to be rebuilt and returned. But he was down, his WAAAGH disrupted, his retinue annihilated, his advance broken. For today, that was enough. Thor stood in the ruins of the battlefield, Mjolnir in hand, armor scorched and cracked in 3 places, breathing harder than he had since Jotunheim. Beside him, Black Adam was examining his hands, where the sustained power of a 10 discharge had left golden burn marks across his own palms. The God of Thunder looked at the champion of the Egyptian gods. "Not bad," Thor said, using Black Adam's words from the Gargant battle. Black Adam looked at his burned palms, then at the fallen Warboss, then at the slowly faltering Ork advance as Ghazghkull's disrupted WAAAGH withdrew its unifying momentum from the horde. "Adequate," he replied. Above them, the Blood Angels' Thunderhawks circled, and from the vox bead in Thor's ear, Inquisitor Valdor's voice arrived, carrying something he hadn't heard from her before. Something that sounded almost like relief. "Volcanus holds," she said. "Well done." Neither god replied. They were already thinking about what came next. The victory at Volcanus lasted 6 hours before everything fell apart. Thor was in the Medici Bay, not as a patient exactly, more as an unwilling guest of brother apothecary Caius, who had decided that a being capable of cracking Terminator armor with his fists was sufficiently interesting to examine regardless of whether said being had requested examination. The apothecary moved around Thor with the clinical detachment of a scholar presented with a fascinating specimen, running instruments across his armor's cracked sections and making notes in a data slate that Thor suspected contained language a civilian would find alarming. "Your skeletal density is approximately 4 times that of baseline human," Caius observed, not looking up from his instruments. "Your musculature reads as..." He paused, recalibrating the device. "Caius, this can't be correct." "It probably is," Thor said. "The cardiovascular readings suggest your heart produces enough pressure per beat to rupture standard human vasculature several times over." Caius tilted his head with genuine academic interest. "How do your blood vessels survive it?" "They're Asgardian blood vessels." "Remarkable." The apothecary made another note. "And Mjolnir, the hammer. The material registers as something between adamantium and void-touched ceramite on my instruments, but the energy signature is unlike anything in our archives. It's almost as if the weapon is alive," Thor supplied. In its way. It has a machine spirit of sorts, though your people's term for it doesn't quite capture what it is. Caius stopped writing and looked at him directly for the first time. The machine spirit doctrine is sacred to the Adeptus Mechanicus. I'm not disputing it. I'm saying Mjolnir's nature goes beyond the standard definition. Thor met the apothecary's gaze. Your machine spirits are echoes of function. Mjolnir's spirit is a genuine extension of divine intent. There's a difference. Caius was quiet for a moment, then resumed his notes with slightly more speed than before. Thor suspected this was the apothecary equivalent of excited. The door opened, and Heshel entered, moving with the urgency that Thor had learned to associate with news rather than emergency, fast, but not the controlled sprint of a warrior responding to immediate threat. Lord Thor, you're needed in the command center. Is it Black Adam? Heshel's pause was answer enough. The command center had added occupants since the morning briefing. The commander of Asari was there, a lean, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s whose Imperial Guard bearing hadn't been diminished by 60 years of wrongful imprisonment, only refined into something harder and more precise. Beside her stood Commanders Okonkwo and Reyes, both reading the room with a quick tactical assessment of veteran soldiers. Rogue Trader Drecht occupied his customary position in the peripheral space between parties, close enough to hear everything and far enough to claim neutrality. Black Adam stood at the center of the hololithic display, but he wasn't looking at Armageddon's tactical overlay. He'd pulled up a different map, the Imperium of Man in its entirety. 1,000,000 worlds rendered in Imperial cartographic style, the Great Rift cutting across the galaxy like a wound, segmentums labeled in High Gothic, the war zones marked in red that covered perhaps a third of all inhabited space. Valdor stood across from him, and the temperature between them had dropped several degrees below their already frigid baseline. Explain what I'm looking at, Thor said. An empire in terminal decline, Black Adam replied, not looking away from the map. 40,000 years old, governing 1,000,000 worlds and losing ground on every front simultaneously. He touched a control, and the display shifted, showing resource flows, population statistics, casualty rates. 700 billion dead in the last standard century from chaos incursions alone. 300 billion more to Tyranid absorption. Ork casualties are recorded as... He paused. Say... Statistically negligible because the record-keeping infrastructure in Ork contested systems no longer exists. This is classified strategic data, Valdor said. Her voice was dangerously quiet. Magos Brennan left his access terminal active while he went to prayer, Black Adam replied. I read quickly. Brennan's mechadendrites were fully extended and agitated, the tech priest equivalent of considerable distress. The unauthorized access to Adeptus Mechanicus strategic archives constitutes a violation of machine law tertius. The Mechanicus has archives detailing 17 viable alternative power sources for the Golden Throne. Black Adam continued, speaking over the objection with the calm of a man who had anticipated exactly this response and prepared accordingly. Not complete solutions, fragments, partial theories. Research conducted over millennia and then shelved because pursuing it required questioning foundational doctrine. He looked at Valdor directly. 3 of those fragments, combined with technologies currently in development by Tau Earth cast engineers in the Damocles Gulf, would produce a functional prototype within... That is enough. Valdor's composure cracked, just fractionally, just for a moment, but it cracked. You are discussing the most sensitive theological and technical question in the history of the Imperium of Man. The nature of the Golden Throne. The Emperor's survival. This is not a topic for a what? Black Adam's voice was absolute zero. For someone who has lived 5,000 years. For someone who has spoken to gods directly, who has studied divine power mechanics. So who has seen what happens when a civilization builds itself around a single point of failure and refuses to address it? He gestured at the map. Your emperor has been dying on his throne for 10,000 years. The infrastructure of your civilization requires his psychic output to function. And your response to this existential crisis has been to pray harder. The silence was absolute. Vasari and her commanders had gone very still. Drecht was studying something on the ceiling with suspicious intensity. Heschel's gauntlets were white-knuckled on his bolter. Thor stepped forward. Black Adam, I'm not finished. The champion didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. It was one of the things that made him genuinely unnerving. I'm not proposing heresy. I'm proposing engineering. The difference between those two things is whether you're willing to think. Valdor had recovered her composure, and it was iron now, absolute, the face of someone making a decision they'd carry for the rest of their life. Lord Thor, she said, not looking away from Black Adam, I need you to understand what is about to happen. Tell me, what your companion has just described, accessing classified archives, combining that data with Xeno's technical intelligence, and proposing a solution to the Golden Throne question, is defined under the decree passive as tech heresy of the first magnitude, political heresy of the second magnitude, and unsanctioned theological inquiry, carrying a mandatory sentence of execution, Black Adam said. I know. Then why? Thor asked. Black Adam turned to look at him, and for the first time since they'd arrived in the 41st millennium, Thor saw something beyond calculation in the champion's eyes. Something that 5,000 years of ruling, fighting, and enduring had put there. Conviction. Because someone has to say it, Black Adam said. Because I have stood in the ruins of empires that chose tradition over survival, and I know exactly how they end. Because 3 of those Mechanicus archive fragments point toward a solution that could free the Emperor from the throne, restore his full consciousness, and give humanity a living god rather than a dying battery, and everyone who has ever read those fragments has filed them under unacceptable conclusions and moved on. He looked back at the galactic map. I've been here 11 days, and in 11 days I have seen a civilization of staggering capability choosing to lose a war. It could potentially win because winning would require changing things that have been the same for 10,000 years. I freed 40,000 prisoners because it was right. I'm saying this because it is right. He paused. Whether you execute me for it is your concern, not mine. The room held its breath. Thor looked at Valdor. The Inquisitor's human eye was moving between Black Adam and the galactic map with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Fury, yes, but underneath it, something that might have been the reluctant recognition of a mind that had thought similar thoughts in private and never dared voice them. Her hand rested on her power sword's hilt, not drawing it. Resting. If I were to execute you, she said carefully, the Imperium would lose an asset of extraordinary capability at a critical strategic moment. Yes. And if I were to report this conversation in full to the Ordo Hereticus, they would dispatch a full inquisitorial conclave within the month, and everyone in this room would face interrogation under methods that make death seem like a reasonable preference. I'm aware. And you said it anyway. I said it anyway. Valdor was quiet for 10 seconds, 15, 20. Then she turned to Brennan. Magos, your access terminal will be secured with biometric locks before you leave this room. You will file an incident report citing equipment malfunction for the unauthorized access. She looked at Vasari. Commander, you and your officers did not hear this conversation. Now you were preparing logistics reports in the adjacent chamber. She looked at Drecht. Trader Drecht. I have an exceptionally poor memory for things that would cause me administrative difficulty, Drecht replied pleasantly. Valdor's gaze finally moved to Black Adam. The fragments you referenced. I need to know which 3. The shift was so subtle that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. Not agreement, not remotely agreement, but the action of a woman who had just made a decision that would define the rest of her career and possibly her life, and had chosen to make it anyway. Black Adam studied her for a moment. Then he moved to the data terminal and input 3 archive reference codes from memory. "These," he said, "are cross-referenced with Tau research from Expedition Fleet Corvatra's technical intelligence files, which your Ordo Xenos has in archive and has never declassified, and the theoretical framework holds." Valdor looked at the reference codes for a long moment. "This conversation never happened," she said, "officially." "Understood," Black Adam replied. Thor exhaled slowly. He'd been in diplomatic situations that had almost gone catastrophically wrong before, but this one had skated closer to the edge than most. He looked at Black Adam with an expression that tried to communicate several things simultaneously: relief, exasperation, grudging respect, and a sincere request for slightly more warning before the next existential gambit. Black Adam's slight nod indicated he'd received approximately half of those messages. "There's something else," Hesiel said from the doorway. He'd been so still during the confrontation that everyone had half forgotten he was there. "The reason I came to get you, Lord Thor, before—" He gestured vaguely at the room, indicating everything that had just occurred. "This." "Tell me," Thor said. "Astropathic communication from Sector 12. Ghazghkull Thraka has been recovered by his odd boys." Hesiel's voice was professionally neutral in the way it got when the news was significant. "His brain has already been transferred to a new body. He's calling a full WAAAGH convergence, pulling forces from every active front on Armageddon toward a single point." "Which point?" Thor asked. Hesiel looked at Valdor. The Inquisitor pulled up the tactical overlay again. "Every front on Armageddon, every Ork force, every WAAAGH was energy concentration. Lines of movement that had been divergent were converging slowly, inexorably, toward a single location. This fortress, this command center, the place where Valdor coordinated the Imperium's entire Armageddon defense. Ghazghkull wasn't just coming back, he was coming here." "How long?" Thor asked. 18 hours, Valdor said. "Perhaps 20. Thor looked at Mjolnir. He looked at his cracked armor, the damage from the last engagement still unrepaired. He thought about Ghazghkull on his knees, the genuine satisfaction in those blazing eyes. The words, "Good fight." The Warboss hadn't been beaten. He'd been interrupted, and he'd taken the measure of both gods in the process. He'd be back with that knowledge and a new body and every Ork on Armageddon behind him. "Look, we need to discuss the defense of this position," Thor said. "Yes," Valdor agreed. She looked between the two gods, and this time there was something in her expression that hadn't been there 11 days ago when she'd first arrived at the crater they'd made landing. "We need to discuss a great many things." Black Adam had moved away from the hololithic display. He stood at the room's narrow viewport, looking out at Armageddon's burning skyline, at the diseased sky and the distant thunder of artillery, and the endless evidence of a war that had been going on longer than most civilizations had existed. 18 hours, he said quietly. "Enough time." "For what?" Thor asked. Black Adam didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it got when he was thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. "To decide what we're actually fighting for." Thor followed his gaze to the burning horizon. The question hung in the air between them. 2 gods from different universes, standing in the ruins of humanity's future, each carrying the weight of choices that would define not just this battle, but everything that came after. Outside, Armageddon burned, and the greatest WAAAGH in living memory was coming home. The 18 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world, which for 3 million inhabitants of Hive Volcanus, it very nearly was. Valdor's Fortress Command Center transformed during those hours into something that defied the distinction between military installation and religious site. Blood Angels chaplains moved through the corridors, performing the rites of battle, their deep voices carrying litanies that had been spoken before engagements for 10,000 years. Servitors ran ammunition to every firing point with mechanical devotion. Commissars addressed ranks of Imperial Guard in the parade grounds below, voices carrying the absolute certainty of men and women who had long since made their peace with death and were now primarily concerned with the quality of it. Thor spent the first 6 hours with Hesiel, now walking the defensive perimeter, learning the terrain the way a warrior should, on foot with eyes and instincts rather than tactical displays. The fortress's outer walls were 20 meters thick, reinforced with materials the Mechanicus called adamantine-laced ferrocrete. The killing grounds between the outer and inner walls were mined, trapped, and covered by overlapping fields of fire from 73 weapons emplacements. It was the kind of defense that could hold against anything short of a Titan assault. Ghazghkull was bringing things that were short of nothing. Black Adam spent those same 6 hours in conversation with Vasari, Okonkwo, and Reyes. Thor observed briefly and recognized what was happening. Not military planning exactly, but something more foundational. Black Adam was building something. Not a philosophy of resistance articulated in the language of military command. A framework for thinking about the Imperium's future that began with 3 commanders who'd once chosen civilians over orders and extended from there towards something Thor couldn't yet fully see. He wasn't sure if it was hope or trouble. Probably both. In the 7th hour, Thor found Valdor on the fortress's highest accessible spire, standing at a viewport that looked out over Armageddon's burning horizon. The perpetual smog was lit from beneath by 1,000 fires, turning the sky a deep arterial red. Beautiful in the specific way that beautiful and terrible overlapped in this universe, more often than not. "You knew," he said without preamble, "about the archive fragments. Not specifically what he'd find, but that someone with enough intelligence and enough access would eventually find them." Valdor didn't turn from the viewport. The Ordo Xenos has analysts who spend their careers looking for information patterns, tracking what questions lead to other questions. A pause. "Yes, I knew the fragments existed. I've known for 11 years. And I am an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, sworn to protect the Imperium from external threats. The Golden Throne question falls under Ordo Malleus jurisdiction. It is." She paused, choosing words with the care of someone navigating between what they believed and what they were permitted to believe, above my authority to act upon. "But not above your authority to think about." Her human eye finally moved from the horizon to find his reflection in the viewport's thick glass. "No, not above my authority to think about." Thor considered this. "Is that why you chose him for the Hemlock Wastes specifically? Not just to separate us, to put him near the Mechanicus adepts, to give him access to minds that had been outside Imperial information control for years?" Valdor was quiet long enough that the silence was its own answer. "You engineered this," Thor said. "Not accusation, assessment." "I created conditions," she said carefully. What grew in them was his own nature. Thor looked at her reflection for a moment. "That's either very wise or very dangerous. In my experience, those are the same thing." She finally turned from the viewport. "Lord Thor, after this battle, however it ends, you and Black Adam will need to decide your futures in this millennium. The Imperium cannot officially sanction what you are. Say 2 unclassified entities of divine-level capability operating without Imperial oversight is a category of problem the Ordo Xenos has contingency protocols for. Meaning that if you choose to remain in the 41st millennium, you will be hunted. Not by me. I have no desire to waste the resources, and frankly, the tactical calculus doesn't favor it. But the Ordo Hereticus will not ignore your existence indefinitely. Other Inquisitors will make different choices than I have." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to make your decision with full information." Thor appreciated that. He even said so. In the 12th hour, the WAAAGH arrived early. The warning came from the outer picket lines, a cascading series of Vox transmissions that began with coordinated reporting and devolved into static and screaming over approximately 90 seconds. The Ork advance had hit the outer defensive perimeter with a force that the preliminary intelligence had underestimated by roughly 40%. Ghazghkull had learned from Volcanus. He didn't lead from the front this time. He led from the center, a moving fortress of meganobs and deft dreads and battle wagons that advanced in a formation sophisticated enough to suggest either significant tactical evolution or the input of a mind sharper than standard Ork commanders. Thor suspected both. A new body with the same ancient brain and 6 hours to think about what had gone wrong. The outer walls held for 3 hours, and the courage of the Imperial Guard was genuine and staggering. Ordinary humans in simple carapace armor, holding firing positions against a tide that defied rational opposition, their laser guns not nearly enough, but their discipline making each shot count. The Blood Angels coordinated the defense with the expertise of warriors who had held impossible positions across 10,000 years of war. But the mathematics was still wrong. In the 15th hour, the outer wall's southern section fell. Thor was there when it happened. He'd positioned himself at the most vulnerable point, not because Valdor had asked him to, not because it was tactically optimal, but because that was where the ordinary people were dying and his presence could change that math. He fought for 3 hours without pause, Mjolnir moving in continuous arcs. Lightning no longer conserved, but spent freely because there would be no tomorrow to save it for. He took damage. Real damage. His arm, where a meganob's power claw had caught him, was functioning at perhaps 70%, the divine musculature stressed beyond its normal tolerances. His armor was cracked in 5 places. His lightning came slower now, each summons requiring will he was spending faster than he could recover it. He fought anyway, because that was what honor required. Black Adam held the northern approach alone for 2 hours. Thor learned this afterward from Vasari, who had watched from a command position and described it with the flat, precise language of someone who had seen extraordinary things before but was processing this particular event carefully. Black Adam had stood at the approach's choke point and simply refused to let anything pass. Not tactics, not strategy, refusal. 5,000 years of absolute will expressed as a physical fact. He took damage too. The WAAAGH, energy amplifying the Orks beyond their natural parameters, eventually produced hits that even his divine durability had to absorb and manage. By the time Thor reached his position in the 16th hour, Black Adam's uniform was torn in 3 places, and he was bleeding golden light from a wound at his side where a meganob had gotten a power claw through his guard. "That looks significant," Thor said. "It isn't," Black Adam replied, and drove his fist through the meganob's chest plate before it could follow up. "You're bleeding divine energy." "I'm aware. It will stop." They fought side by side for the next hour without discussion, falling into a rhythm that felt less like cooperation and more like 2 instruments finding the same key. Thor covered the angles that Black Adam's speed made him dismiss. Black Adam covered the moments when Thor's lightning needed time to rebuild. It wasn't trust exactly. 5,000 years of Black Adam's history and Thor's own complicated relationship with authority made trust a long-term project rather than a battlefield development. But it was something functional and real. In the 17th hour, Ghazghkull himself breached the inner wall, and he came through it rather than over it. A 4.5-meter embodiment of divine Ork while simply walking through ferrocrete and adamantine reinforcement, as if the distinction between wall and open space was a suggestion he had chosen not to follow. The new body was slightly different from the last, same mechanical augmentation philosophy, but the proportions were subtly adjusted, the hydraulic joints reinforced in exactly the places Thor and Black Adam had compromised. The meganobs followed through the breach like a green tide pouring through a crack in a dam. Thor met him in the corridor beyond. Not in open ground where Ghazghkull's mass and reach were advantages, but in the confined geometry of the fortress's interior, corridors wide enough for a start, which was not wide enough for a 4.5-meter warboss moving at combat speed without adjustment. It was the kind of tactical choice that required a warrior to know their own capabilities and their opponent's limitations simultaneously. Ghazghkull slowed. Not stopped, slowed. "Goldie hair," the warboss said, his new voice slightly different but carrying the same intelligence as before. "The boys said you fought all night." "I did," Thor confirmed. "You look like it." The power claw opened and closed. "Where's the other one?" "Coming," Black Adam's voice said from behind Ghazghkull. The warboss turned just in time to take the full force of Black Adam's descent from the ceiling directly onto his shoulders. The impact drove Ghazghkull to one knee in the corridor, the floor cratering beneath the combined weight and force. Black Adam's hands found the same junction points as Volcanus, the locations where divine energy and Ork mechanical systems interfaced most vulnerably, and the power of a 10 began to flow. Thor hit the power claw arm with everything he had remaining. The joint gave. The arm dropped, hydraulics severed, dragging on the floor. Ghazghkull roared, and the sound in the enclosed corridor was physically painful, a wave of WAAAGH energy that blew out lighting strips and cracked the walls. Thor leaned into it, feet planted, Mjolnir raised, lightning meeting the WAAAGH wave head-on. The collision of energies lit the corridor like a star. When Thor's vision cleared, Ghazghkull was on both knees. Black Adam was still on his back, arms locked around the warboss's massive frame, golden light pouring from his wound, but his grip absolute. The power of a 10 was deep now. Not surface disruption, but something more fundamental, reaching into the warp connection that made Ghazghkull more than an orc, and asking it questions it couldn't answer. The WAAAGH. Energy fluctuated wildly. In the fortress above and in the killing grounds outside, Thor could feel it. The orc advanced stuttering, losing the divine coherence that had sustained it, individual greenskins suddenly uncertain of the purpose that had driven them forward. Not defeated, never defeated, but confused, and confusion was enough. Ghazghkull looked at Thor with those blazing eyes, both of them fighting now. Black Adam's a 10 power against his warp connection, Thor's physical presence against his remaining weapon systems. And what Thor saw in those eyes was complex enough to give him pause. Not defeat, not rage, and something that in a human face would have read as satisfaction. "Told yez," Ghazghkull said, his voice strained but carrying. "Gork and Mork sent yez, a proper test." The eyes blazed one final time. "Ya passed." The WAAAGH. Energy collapsed. Not faded, collapsed. A sudden absence where a presence had been, the warp connection that had made Ghazghkull a divine instrument of Ork, war simply releasing, withdrawing, as if the gods themselves had acknowledged the result, and moved on to whatever cosmological concern occupied beings of that nature next. Ghazghkull's new body went still. Not dead. They both knew he wasn't dead. The odd boys would find him. His brain would be recovered. He would return somewhere, sometime, to wage the great war again. But not here. Not today. And not with the divine momentum that had sustained this assault. Armageddon's defense held. In the aftermath, when the surviving Ork forces had fragmented into the disorganized raiding that represented their baseline state, without a warboss of Ghazghkull's power to unify them, when the Blood Angels had begun the systematic purging of the breach points, when Valdor's command center had begun receiving confirmed reports of the assault's collapse across all sectors simultaneously, Thor and Black Adam sat in the ruined corridor beside the fallen warboss and existed quietly for a while. Black Adam's wound had closed. The golden light no longer bled from it, though the torn uniform remained. He was examining his hands with an expression Thor recognized. The post-battle accounting, the inventory of what had been spent and what remained. "The fragments you found," Thor said. "Do you actually believe it could work? Freeing the Emperor from the throne?" Black Adam was quiet for a moment. "I believe the research is sound. Whether the Imperium would survive the transition period, the time between when he steps down and when the new power source is established?" He paused. "That's a different question, a political question as much as a technical one. And Valdor, she'll work on it quietly, through channels that don't officially exist." Black Adam almost smiled. "She's been waiting 11 years for someone to say what I said aloud. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone to say the thing." Thor looked at the ceiling of the ruined corridor, threw it metaphorically to the sky above and the stars beyond and everything between here and Asgard. I need to find a way home eventually. As do I. But not immediately." Black Adam considered this. "No, not immediately." He looked at the corridor walls, the Imperial iconography even here. Aquilas, skulls, prayers in High Gothic pressed into every surface. "There's more to do here." "Different things," Thor said. "We'll keep working at cross purposes half the time." "Probably. You'll do something that horrifies the Imperium and I'll have to decide whether to stop you." "Almost certainly." Black Adam looked at him with those ancient eyes. "And you'll make alliances I consider naive and trust people I would not trust, and I'll have to decide whether to let you learn the hard way or intervene." "That sounds like a working relationship," Thor said. "It sounds like a permanent argument." "In Asgard, we call those friendships." Black Adam was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sounds of the battle's aftermath filled the silence. Vox chatter, distant explosions, the rumble of vehicles, the occasional gunshot as the purge continued. The everyday sounds of a galaxy at war, which was the only kind of galaxy this millennium knew. "I've never had many of those," he said finally. "Neither have I," Thor replied. "Not real ones." They sat with that for a while. Inquisitor Valdor found them an hour later, still in the corridor beside the dormant Warboss, when she came to verify the confirmed reports with her own eyes. She looked at Ghazghkull's still form, at the two gods who had stopped the greatest WAAAGH in a generation, and at the ruined corridor and the cracked walls in the evidence of a battle that had gone to the absolute limit of what divine capability could sustain. Her cyber eagle landed on Ghazghkull's shoulder and regarded him with mechanical dispassion. "We need to discuss your futures here," she said. "We know," Thor replied. "The Administratum will require classification. The Ecclesiarchy will have opinions. The Ordo Hereticus will have stronger ones." She looked at both of them with her mismatched eyes. "It will be complicated." "Everything worth doing is," Black Adam said. Valdor almost smiled. It was the closest Thor had seen her come to it. She looked at Ghazghkull one more time, then back at them. "The Emperor protects," she said, in the tone of someone who believed it and had paid the price for believing it for decades. Thor stood and raised Mjolnir. Black Adam rose beside him, golden and battered and absolutely unbowed. Two gods from different universes, standing in the bones of humanity's darkest future, having chosen to stay in it, not because they were commanded to, not because they had no choice, but because there was work left to do, and they were, at their cores, beings who did not walk away from work that mattered. The 41st millennium had seen empires rise and fall, gods born and murdered, stars live and die. It was a universe that consumed legends the way Armageddon consumed its dead, thoroughly, without sentiment, in service of the next battle. It had never seen anything quite like this. Two gods from beyond the veil who had come not to conquer or be conquered, but to argue, to fight, or to build something in the margins of a civilization that had forgotten margins could exist, and who had decided, in the wreckage of a ruined corridor beside a dormant warboss, that the 41st millennium was worth the trouble. Whatever came next, the Ordo Hereticus, the political fallout of Black Adam's archive gambit, The slow, quiet work of Valdor and her forbidden research, the permanent argument that apparently constituted a friendship between an Asgardian prince and an ancient Kandaki champion, it would begin here. In the grim darkness of the far future, even gods must choose their wars carefully. Thor and Black Adam had chosen theirs. More legends await in the darkness between stars. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.